All right, we're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. So my name is Kelly Anderson. I work with the Chamber's Global Innovation Policy Center. I've had the privilege of working on this event for 7 years now. So I just wanted to start by calling up our Senior Vice President, Patrick Kilbride at the U.S. Chamber's GIPC to kick us off.
Thanks, Kelly. Welcome, everyone. I'm Patrick Kilbride. It's great to have you back, all of you, and an especially warm welcome to our guests from around the world, the USPTO IP Attachés. Welcome. You know, the world's understanding of intellectual property is changing quickly. In countries from India to Nigeria, Vietnam, Indonesia, and many, many others, and we've begun to measure this in the U.S. Chamber International IP Index, countries are investing at a very basic level in intellectual property education and awareness with curricula aimed at elementary school students, secondary school, undergrad and graduate level courses, as well as education of entrepreneurs about how to use IP rights to access financing, to protect assets, and to develop innovative and creative new products. At the same time as we're seeing this, in countries, in Geneva we hear a very different message. We hear that high-level political rhetoric that says intellectual property is somehow bad for development, bad for the growth of developing countries. This is what my colleague Ellen Szymanski has dubbed the IP disconnect, and it's something we're focused quite a bit on this year. But I believe strongly that this ground level attention to intellectual property is really taking root. And to the extent that that's real and that's successful, it's due in large part to the advocates we have here in the U.S. government, housed at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, in the Office of Policy and International Affairs, and most directly in the U.S. IP Attachés that carry that message in capitals around the world. And it's clear to me, clear to all of us at GIPC, that your message is getting through. And so we are so pleased to have the opportunity again this year to host the U.S. IP Attachés for a roundtable discussion of some of the compelling developments in their regions and their specific markets. And this conversation helps to inform a year's worth of work. As we head into 2019, we're going to see the release of the 7th edition of the U.S. Chamber International IP Index, which will be a rallying point for our understanding of how countries are approaching IP. We'll see the U.S. government accept submissions and then produce the Special 301 report, which is also going to add to our understanding of what specific problems industry is identifying as the most urgent. And we're going to be engaged directly in these markets, but we can only do it effectively because of the IP attachés here, because of the companies that have taken such an active role in GIPC, and because of the leadership of people like Ellen Szymanski, Kelly Anderson, and so many others on the GIPC team who wake up every day thinking about how can we make intellectual property work better for not only for the companies that we represent, but for people around the world who are desperate to benefit from this transformative economy that we live in, that sees so much innovation, so much creativity, and so much day-to-day change. So without further ado, I want to welcome a really dear friend and distinguished colleague, Shira Perlmutter, on behalf of the USPTO Office of Policy and International Affairs. Shira.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick, and good morning, everyone. I'm a little bit discombobulated by not being at the chamber where we usually do this event, but this is really a beautiful site. It is an honor to be able to be here to introduce, or for most of you, reintroduce our IP Attachés. And this roundtable has really been the cornerstone of the week-long consultations that the Attachés engage in Washington every year. And it's really a reflection on the very strong partnership that the USPTO and the Attaché program enjoys with the Chamber and with GIPC in particular. And from our perspective, this partnership has really been critical in helping us understand the IP concerns and interests of a very broad range of American companies as they look to do business around the world. So one example of the kind of collaboration we've engaged in when we, both the attachés and their colleagues at PTO headquarters, prepare comments on draft legislation in countries such as China. That work is very much informed by what we learn from the GIPC and its members. And we work very closely with GIPC and the Chamber in enhancing, or working to enhance, trying to enhance IP systems around the world. And just to give one example, Duncan Wilson and Mike Mangelson, two of our China-based attachés who are here today, will be attending the next session of the US-China IP Cooperation Dialogue, sponsored by the Chamber in Beijing next month. So, as most of you already know, the attachés are a valuable on-the-ground resource for US stakeholders, and they manage to marry not just the skills of being IP experts, but also the skills of being diplomats that are based in all of our embassies and consulates overseas. And their role is to advocate for US government policy positions on IP, all for the benefit of American owners and users of intellectual property. And they do it primarily in three ways. First, by directly advocating with host governments, and they form very close relationships with the governments where they're based. Second, they do a lot of indirect advocacy through training government officials in their countries and regions on IP matters. And third, they conduct public awareness programs to really build grassroots support for our policy positions. Now, the program, as most of you know, was established back in 2005 based on the recognition that the increasing globalization in the world would continue to present IP owners and users with formidable challenges worldwide. And it's expanded over the years to the point that we now have 13 posts in 10 locations around the world. And we have 11 of those posts represented here today. One of them is based in Geneva, dealing with multilateral institutions. There's actually two in Geneva dealing with multilateral institutions, the WTO on the one hand and the UN institutions, including WIPO on the other. She could not be here today, Christine Schlegelmilch, as some of you know, because she's attending an important meeting at WIPO and representing the United States. The IGC, for those of you who follow these things. We also have attachés and specialists based, and just alphabetically, not in order of importance, in Belgium, Brazil, China, India, Kuwait for the Middle East, Mexico, Peru, and Thailand, and they generally cover multiple countries within their regions. So as you'll hear and see, they're a very impressive group of experts with a very deep understanding of the IP landscape and trends in their regions, which they will be very happy to share with you. And this event is part of a full week of meetings for them. They may not be completely exhausted yet, but they will be by Friday. They are meeting with people in different parts of the USPTO, other agencies in the US government, and stakeholders in all areas of intellectual property. And this follows outreach we've been doing over the past few years in other parts of the country. So we're trying to expand awareness of the program and the benefits it can provide to American businesses beyond the Beltway. And what we've done, over the last 4 years before this year, we've gone to all 4 of the PTO's regional offices. And this year, the attachés spent a few days in Chicago last week talking to stakeholders there. So we're delighted that we're able to do this, but I have to say this roundtable is really critical And one of the highlights and cornerstones, as I had said, in our consultations, it really allows us to better understand the needs, interests, expectations of American IP owners and users. So please, we hope that you will ask a lot of questions, share your thoughts and your insights into IP challenges in the different regions. And I will stop there and turn it over to our wonderful group of attachés. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Shira. We are so honored to have you here and grateful for all the work that you do. So next up, before we turn it over to the attachés, I wanted to invite our friend Tom Bombellis to give some brief remarks. Tom is the head of NGO and industry relations at the World Intellectual Property Organization, and we thought it would be interesting for him to kind of set the stage for our MLO panel by giving us an update of what's happening on the ground. So without further ado, come on up.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here today. My name again is Tom Bombellis. It's great to be back in Washington, where I lived and worked for 30 years before. Just about 10 years ago, I moved to Geneva to go to work for the World Intellectual Property Organization. And I just wanted to set the stage a little bit, as Kelly said, to put WIPO in the context of the international IP and innovation agenda in the sort of the multilateral sphere. The World Intellectual Property Organization, as probably most of you, but perhaps not everybody knows, is a specialized agency of the United Nations established in the early 1970s with a specific mandate to work on intellectual property and innovation policy. Our mission is to help our member states, of which there are 191, to help them develop a balanced and effective legal framework that supports innovation in their economies. I appreciated what Patrick and Shira said in terms of where we are now in the 21st century. Obviously, everybody knows that future and high value added economic development is in the field of innovation, creativity, etc. But how to get there and how to get there in ways that are effective and keep development needs in mind is, shall we say, to put it mildly, sometimes a source of disagreement. And what we try to do at the World Intellectual Property Organization is serve our member states, put forward a pro-innovation agenda by having activities in a variety of areas. First of all, we provide services. And this makes us if not completely unique, certainly rare in the UN system. We have treaty systems that many of you are familiar with, and certainly if you worked in the private sector, your patent departments and attorneys are familiar with, which is the Patent and Cooperation Treaty. This is an international framework that basically makes it easier and more efficient for innovators to apply for and obtain patent protection ultimately in the markets where they intend to sell their products. The genius of this system, from the point of view of somebody who works at WIPO, is that there are fees associated with the use of this system, and that in fact provides a lot of revenue for the organization. In fact, 96% of our revenue overall comes from users of our IP systems. 72% of that is actually the PCT, so almost 70% of our total revenue comes from the patent system, but we also get revenue streams from use of the trademark systems, industrial designs, and some others. Put it another way, member states account for less than 5% of our operating revenue. So we also have global infrastructure information services, and I think there's a very nice synergy between what the GIPC publishes every year, and I certainly encourage you also, look at the WIPO website. There's lots of information there in terms of publications, World Intellectual Property Indicators Report, which was just issued last week, shows it's a great source of statistics and other kinds of information to buttress these arguments about what we're talking about today, how innovation and IP are really engines of economic growth and high value added economic growth. We also have a normative function, which is one of my favorite words in the multilateral system, which is a nice word for negotiating treaties and agreements. That's not going so well at the moment, but that's largely a function of the fact that there aren't a lot of successful international negotiations anywhere, and I don't want to spend any more time on that. And I want to conclude by just saying another area where I'm directly involved in, and I think that I really want to emphasize to you as IP Attachés and also members of the private sector, is because of our mission and our field of activity, we are very open to doing collaborative projects and platforms with all sectors of the economy, public and private sector. So we have about 4 or 5 different platforms that are collaborative to address IP and innovation issues in a tangible way and that take on some of the controversial areas. So with my background, I worked in the private sector here in Washington before I moved to Geneva. I helped establish 2 platforms. One just launched a couple of months ago, both in the health sector, one to catalyze more research and development for neglected diseases. Another is a patent transparency platform called PatInformed that just launched at the end of September. We have a similar platform for technology matching in environment, and somewhat of a different one called ABC, Accessible Books Consortium, which helps put into practice the commitments made by governments and stakeholders to help visually impaired people get access to copyrighted materials. So that's also by way of saying we are very open. And I'll conclude by saying, since this next panel is about the multilateral framework, sometimes, quite honestly, the multilateral environment can look, shall we say, not so friendly from the point of view of pro-innovation or IP protection. There's a lot of skepticism. We are not skeptical at WIPO. We are very much pro-constructive, forward-thinking agencies that want to help all the stakeholders take advantage and position themselves to benefit economically, socially, culturally from the trends of economic development, of which innovation is the key in the 21st century. That's our mindset, that's what we do, and that's what we believe in, and I'm very happy to share that with you this morning. Thank you, Patrick, for inviting me.
Thank you, Tom, for being here with us today. So without further ado, we'll get started with our attaché panels. So I'd like to welcome up George York, a Senior Vice President at the Recording Industry Association of America, Susan Wilson, our IP attaché based in Brussels, Belgium, and Deborah Lashley Johnson, who's our IP attaché based in Geneva, Switzerland.
Well, that was a chance. Well, thanks, everyone, and good morning. First, of course, a tremendous thank you to the Chamber and GIPC, to Patrick and to Ellen, to Kelly Anderson in particular for organizing today's event. Thanks also to Tom for a great introduction to multilateral organizations, which is our topic for this first panel. And I must say thank you also to the IP Attachés and to PTO for the IP Attaché program, which is, for us, the gold standard in IP advocacy for US IP rights holders around the world. It's something that the recording industry strongly supports and everyone in this room strongly supports. And I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity to express and to demonstrate our commitment to the program going forward. So I look forward to today's panel. Most importantly, I'm tremendously honored to be on stage together with 2 of the IP Attachés All-Stars. This is literally the Hall of Fame inductee ceremony, I think, hopefully. And all of you will be invited to join after today's event. So welcome.
Heard what we have to say.
It's assumed. And so let me begin by saying multilateral organizations offer a unique challenge and opportunity, of course, with respect to IP advocacy and IP protection. It also requires, I would say, a unique and particular strategic profile. This is true in Brussels, this is true in Paris, and this is most definitely true in Geneva, which is, of course, a very special place for IP globally. And so I wanted to ask Susan and Debbie, DLJ for short, what is the thing, or what are those couple of things that the IP attachés need most to do their job best?
Wow, George, get started right off the bat. Not even going to let us warm up and say some nice words?
Go for it.
All right. Do you want to go first? Do you want me to take this?
Well, I mean, just because we've been talking about this for a bit this week now, the importance of data. I mean, I'm always extremely thankful when industry groups come by to the U.S. mission, to the WTO in Geneva, and provide us not only anecdotal information in terms of what's going on in the ground in various countries and how that translates to what's being said in Geneva, but then also the economic data. The conversations, particularly in the WTO TRIPS Council, we've evolved a bit. It's no longer IP's bad, IP's good. It's a very more thoughtful, I like to think, conversation in terms of kind of the economic data points with respect to IP and innovation. So those are a harder set of conversations requiring more data, and you guys are, perfect keepers of that. So please, keeping us in the loop with respect to new studies and new analyses is extremely becoming more important in my job.
So I'm going to echo that because this is something that we've been asking for, and I say we because I've been around forever in the U.S. government. I think you're reaching forever too, Debbie. This issue of data, of counterbalancing arguments, of facts to fight the misperceptions and the prejudices and the inflammatory remarks that are so easy and cheap, and nobody likes the status quo. Right? Everybody wants to be disruptive. Everybody wants to be creative. But if you change the status quo in a way that doesn't recognize the damage that you'll do, if you're only looking at what you might gain, and if you're not assessing what you might gain accurately, you're doing a lot of damage, not just to yourself, but worldwide if you're a leader in the IP space. I'm saying this on top of Debbie because Europe is our best friend on these issues. Europe is an amazing market. Europe isn't just a multilateral organization, it's 28 countries that really believe in IP. And yet there are conversations underway that are being pushed by parochial interests that don't reflect the reality, that don't reflect an accurate read of economics. So it's not just doing the studies, it's figuring out how to use them. It's figuring out how to make them part of the conversation. It's looking for people who can take the time to be part of those conversations and say the hard things in the closed rooms, not just in public, but also in the inter-service consultations, in the parliament. We have to find a way it's not sexy to say IP is a great thing. It's sexier to say we need to tear it down and make everything accessible to everyone. We have to find a way to get good information and empower people to speak out, because it is, as Tom said, it is the engine of our economies, and that's undeniable.
I was just going to kind of add on to what you were saying.
You're going to riff off of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of the conversations in Geneva, stakeholders coming through, extremely important, talking to health attachés, for example. A lot of the important messaging that we're doing on IP and innovation is extremely crucial, particularly in Geneva. And to kind of juxtapose what's actually going on in a lot of these UN organizations where IP is viewed as a barrier, not viewed as an enabling tool for innovation and for access. So having those conversations not only with health attachés and with other missions, but also with secretariats, meeting with the WHO secretariats and on a number of them in various areas, working on these issues on IP and public health. Also, continuing your great relationships with WIPO and with the WTO TRIPS Council as well. They are a wealth of information. They're doing fabulous work on the ground. They provide that helpful outlet with respect to these conversations, and really cultivating those relationships is just as important.
And you'll hear other attachés say later in their presentations the importance of early, before it all goes wrong. I think now that we've had attachés in Geneva for a while and that I've been in Brussels, I think we can better map processes so that we can have the conversations that we need to have earlier on. The Commission will change over in 2020, and this Commission will hand off some very important legislative initiatives, let's say, to the new Commission for them to consider. That process doesn't begin when the new Commission comes into power, let's say. It begins now. So we need to find ways now to start injecting facts, injecting data, having conversations with these very trusted and intelligent partners about the future of innovation in Europe and in the transatlantic economy. So one thing I think that needs to happen that I'd like to ask for the associations and the organizations that are here today, start having those strategic conversations. You know, lobbying after a proposal is out, you may be effective, but chances are your influence is going to be very limited. Let's start having some programs and conversations and injecting different points of view into the conversation leading up to the legislative proposal, and see if it might take a different course. So that's on the kind of structural what we do work-wise. Can I go really granular?
Let's get real.
So there's an issue, and Dominic, forgive me for stealing your thunder if I'm stealing your Shira on this, because I know you guys have been working on this since the inception of the program. But this attaché rank issue, and I don't know if there's anybody in the room who has not ever heard us say this. I'm going to say now, 3.5 years in Brussels. Yes, I have access to my friends. Yes, I have access to the people that I've known and worked with for years. It doesn't matter. I could go there and call myself Turtle. There are a lot of people who are in really important positions who have tremendous influence over this that I don't have access to because I'm an attaché. Right? If I had a better sounding title, if I was a counselor, I think is what we've been asking for, we would have access not only to higher ranking officials in the Commission and in member states, but also be a stronger voice in the internal USG conversation. So I'll stop there. I'm sure others will have things to say about that, but anything that you can do to work with us and the State Department to do something about this rank issue finally after a decade plus would be greatly appreciated, I think, by the entire program.
Yeah. And just a quick data point, in Geneva, a number of the IP representatives have the rank of counselor and minister counselor, so it would be great to be on par with that.
Thank you so much. This issue of rank is obviously something that has been long-standing, and I think many folks in the room would love to be a part of that effort going forward as appropriate and with your all's wise counsel. But that's something that's, I think, critical, should be on the agenda, should be on the top of the agenda of the GIPC going forward, and we look forward to working with you on that issue, to be sure. And I also think your comments on a data-driven approach is critical to push back against kind of flawed data, right? And also to make our case. What is data? How does data then translate into messaging?
Right.
In, again, Paris, at the OECD, which is has so many different sort of Janus-faced, and I say that in a complimentary way, kind of approaches to IP. And obviously in Geneva, the WTO, WIPO, WHO, what is the messaging that may not work in capitals, that may not work in the US? It's great to say here, IP drives trade surplus. IP drives U.S. contributions to the U.S. economy, to U.S. jobs. But that may not play as well obviously in Brussels or in Geneva. What's the messaging on IP in those jurisdictions?
Well, you know, in terms of WTO TRIPS Council, we have an agenda that's basically 20 years old. A majority of the time we do speak and meet as a council. It's about issues where IP is, we're on the defensive, essentially. It's finding ways to reopen the TRIPS agreement. It's criticisms of provisions. And so for 2 hours for every meeting, we have these wonderful conversations regarding the importance of IP, how that's been critical. This past year, we talked about the societal value of IP in the new economy. So we had a whole session on economic-driven points with respect to intellectual property in various countries' economies, not just the US. We didn't dominate that conversation at all. We spent a lot of time in the second session talking about how IP improves the quality of life. So from these really cool innovations in small countries to very big, impactful results for citizens around the world. So bringing those stories to life is just, I find personally incredible, rewarding. I feel, one of the successes with Geneva, it's hard to move the needle there, but once you're able to have a dialogue and really show that there's more commonality and we're all striving for the same result, we may go at it from different perspectives and different priorities, but we realize we all have the same goals, and that is to improve our economies and using IP as that tool. So that's one area of where data becomes important. I think behind the scenes, in terms of what we're trying to do and the conversations we're trying to have in the WHO, I think that looms very large. I remember a few years when I first started this portfolio, it took a lot of effort to get a positive phrase with respect to IP in the TRIPS agreement. You would have lots of language regarding how TRIPS flexibilities really needs to be the rule, the course that countries may take. Though there are challenges, I am finding recently that the Secretariat is more willing to acknowledge that IP plays an important role with respect to public health and life sciences. So we still have a long ways to go. I think the next battle there is making sure that the agencies who have the IP expertise lead that conversation, that it's not dominated by the development agencies in Geneva and by NGOs that are driven in a particular direction. But at least there is that recognition up front in a number of the documents that they're working on that the IP plays this important role.
So all of that is, as usual, all of that is completely right, Debbie. What can I add to what you've just said? I think individualizing the messages. I think we've gotten to a point where we shout things at each other. Copyright is good. It's the death of freedom. We need to freely license technologies that are part of standard essential patents. No, we don't. It's the pharmaceuticals kill. No, they don't. It's the dichotomies that we're trapped in that aren't real, that are perpetuated, and then camps develop. And then the press. It's so much easier to react to a press release that someone put out and write a story about it than it is to make a few phone calls and find out what is actually behind the press release. So the general messages, you have to keep them up. They're not working. When you have Europe believes in IP. Europe is a knowledge economy. Europe, I'm going to talk about it as if it's a homogenous thing. Obviously, there's disparity between member states. Some are sort of more IP driven than others. Others are demanders for many of the flexibilities that you would have member states of the WIPO asking for, or WTO. But Europe believes in IP. What Europe is facing is many challenges: political, social, economic, practical, Brexit. So the question is, as the EU or member states are looking at particular policy initiatives or legislative initiatives, how do we personalize the information that we have and get it to the people who need to have it in a way early enough and in a way that gives them the flexibility to absorb and use the information? And when I say flexibility, sometimes it's not helpful for the United States to run screaming in headlines about something that the EU is doing. Sometimes the process has moved too far along, and even if they wanted to change course, they just can't as a matter of fact, right? So really taking advantage of the fact that we now have someone in Brussels and will have hopefully someone in Brussels after I leave, building the kind of long-term relationship with not just our usual interlocutors that we work with in third country markets and in the WIPO and the WTO, but across the Commission, so that we can have these trusted channels through which we can give information early and often that might be helpful to the decision making when the pressures on them to maybe do something that's popular are so great.
Tremendously valuable. So we've talked a little bit about how we get there, but where are we trying to go, right? What does victory look like, if we can even speak so cavalierly about such a place? I was once told by some very wise friend, take the win, right? Know when to get the win. That's Susan, by the way. Take the win. Don't wait for perfect. Get the win. So what is the win in the WTO TRIPS Council or the WIPO SCCR? What is the win in OECD, if that's ever a place we can find? It's sort of like Narnia. What is the win in Brussels for US IP rights holders?
Yeah, I've had to kind of redefine what winning is in Geneva these days. As I said earlier, I think it's just the ability to have that dialogue where it's not this good versus bad kind of simplistic conversation. Just personally, we've increased our membership in terms of the IP and Innovation Group. We're getting more developing countries interested in the conversation. So even when there's not TRIPS Council meetings, being able to walk up to my colleagues from various countries and go through issues and talk about studies that we've come across and sharing that information, I find that to be a win, and just to develop that relationship and just pinging each other with ideas for next year and who are we going to talk to in terms of further expanding our message. I think that's extremely important, particularly these days in the WTO and coupled with the fact dealing with a sometimes sensitive or controversial topic like IP. So yeah, I'll leave it to that. I won't reach for the stars on that, but I think just those daily wins is extremely important.
So I just want everyone to know that George actually shared these questions with us as we were walking down the hall to the room. So you're getting about as candid a reaction as you possibly can. Candid/career ending.
That's right.
All right. What is a win? A win is for the European Union to remain the unequivocal IP champion that it has been in my lifetime. That's the win. How do we get that win? By a series of small wins. Long-term thinking, fact-based, unemotional decision-making, looking at where are the real market failures, recognizing what is the actual threat. Are there, to the long-term prosperity, what is the real threat? And I will say that we are not a threat to each other. And banding together to deal with the real threats. That would be the win for me.
So, I just want to take a moment to recognize the fact that Debbie in Geneva created a group called the Friends of IP. And that would be hysterical if it wasn't so valuable. The fact that we had to even do that in Geneva, it's just an incredible testament to your sort of daily work in Geneva to create a group in Geneva to be that, to represent those issues. So you should be really commended for that. And
well, I wanted to make a slight correction. I just continued the marathon that you started with respect to that group.
No. And second, Susan, as everyone probably knows about Susan, moving quickly on.
George was also responsible for what he's about to say.
Susan really is the face of the U.S. government and the wisdom of the U.S. government in Europe on IP matters. Of course, we have tremendous experts based in Washington and who are engaging directly and intimately and regularly in Europe. But on the day-to-day level, people sometimes ask, who do you call if you want to talk to Europe? Well, the answer is, who do you call if you want to talk to the United States on IP? From the EU, and it's Susan Wilson. And so this is something you should all just recognize, this unique moment, how blessed we are to have such incredible people representing us in these highly special environments. So I just wanted to commend you for that.
So all of you are encouraged to call all at once.
Right. So the last thing is a bit of a, since it's the holiday season and we like to make wishes, imagine if you were given a magical lantern, which, by the way, I think resides in the Hall of Flags at the Chamber. If you had 3 wishes, what would you wish for? And Debbie, I want you to go wild.
Go wild.
What would you wish for in terms of what we could do to improve the standing of IP in these multilateral organizations?
First, have interventions from certain countries where they're not caveats. They're just full on, this is our national experience and this is the positive role IP has played without the, innovation only appears once in the TRIPS agreement kind of language. That would be rewarding. Really not having to negotiate positive language on IP in general, that just being just part of the template. Just the overall blueprint when discussing trade and intellectual property, that would be great, not to have to trade away something in order to get something as basic as that. And just, I think even more so with the upcoming executive board meetings at the WHO, just a truer recognition of just how important the collaboration among the UN and WTO agencies that exists with respect to intellectual property, and there not being this inherent tension that sometimes does exist. So just having that amplified and just taken as the as the truth, as an ultimate truth would be nice.
Okay, I'm going to be like super sappy, and then I'm going to start crying because I'm half Italian. I'm going to say I actually believe in the IP system. To me, the IP system is the thing that takes you from rags to riches legitimately. I think that too many countries turned away from the IP system too quickly. And it would have delivered different things in different places, but it didn't. We somehow didn't find the magical way to ensure that the benefits of it could be realized by everyone who could benefit. So my one wish is that the true benefits of the IP system could be realized everywhere, that there is an artist or an inventor who could benefit from it. So that's number one. Number two, I would like truth to come back into the conversation. Number three, in light of the attacks in Strasbourg last night, I'm going to use my third wish on peace.
That's...
Thanks for making me cry, George. Damn it.
I think, Susan, thank you, and Debbie, thank you. I think you've given us both valuable insight on the reason why we're gathered here today, but some critical perspective on our issues in the larger scheme of things. So we're super grateful for that, and I think truly profound, as always. I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like what happens in Geneva is a bit untethered from capitals. what's actually happening in capitals, right? So, and sometimes foreign ministries, not our own, of course, but in other countries, have an IP agenda, but it's not the IP expert. It's not the companies. It's not the rights holders. It's not the small businesses, right? It's not the actual creators and the innovators who are driving the bus on the international IP dialogue, right? Mm-hmm. What could the GIPC do? What could industry do? What could the U.S. government do to help retether the Geneva discussion, the Paris discussion at the OECD, and to that extent, you can offer insight into the member state commission dynamic or member state parliament dynamic to retether kind of the real IP champions back to the debate that's affecting their day-to-day lives.
So, in many of the meetings that I've had with stakeholders coming through Geneva, I find that the strategy that a number of the stakeholders are taking with respect to having different conversations is the right strategy. You not just talk to the IP people where you'll get a choir just singing your praises, but you need to have those difficult conversations in country with health ministries, even financial ministries too. A lot of these issues on pricing for pharmaceuticals, for example, is a more global kind of conversation. So just focusing in your individual silos is just creating an opportunity for people to play off of each other, particularly in Geneva. So continuing to do that, thinking in terms of broader collaborations, so just not staying within your own sector, but kind of connecting the dots as to what's going on, particularly on public health, on labeling issues. A lot of this is kind of cross-sector too. In terms of industry's engagement with the WHO, that's a larger kind of public sector initiative. I think should have a kind of a larger, broader focus as well. So continuing to think in those terms. I mean, all of these comments that I'm saying are things that the industry is doing, that you all are doing, but just drilling down into it a bit more, because there are going to be additional challenges, and especially at the upcoming executive board and the World Health Assembly. And beyond that, there's always the next meeting at the WHO to watch out for. So these issues do not go away at all.
Okay, so I'm going to answer that from the perspective of the work that I've done with multilateral organizations, true ones, not the European Union, because the European Union is, the EU is, people are democratically elected to the parliament. The Commission has a wide diversity of employees that represent the member states. So. What do we do with them? We just talk to them. We're two adults in a room that share challenges and share objectives, and we just need to have a clearer, more productive conversation on specific things going forward there. So setting that aside. There is a problem when your multilateral organization has an agenda of its own, rather than reflecting the agendas of its member states. I've seen a lot over the last 30 years that would fall into that category, and that kind of freelancing and agenda setting and manipulation of member states and manipulation of information, you cannot leave these organizations alone. Several of them could benefit from leadership changes and changes in personnel. So that's something for the State Department to think about, but something for you to think about. All of these organizations are comprised of governments. All of these governments run economies. You are active in all of those economies. When you go in and to talk to those government officials about what is going on with your company, spend 2 minutes talking about that government's behavior and its rhetoric, and whether it's contributing constructively or not to the conversation in the international organizations, and I guarantee you things will change.
Based on a tremendous amount of experience from you both. So let me, I know we have a packed agenda for today and many more panels to come. So let's maybe, thanks to Susan Wilson, Debbie Lashley Johnson for an incredible panel, for all the hard work that you do, all the fun you're going to have going forward. on all these issues,
Yeah.
and all the work that we have to do to help.
Yeah.
Definitely. And all the work that we have to do to help you in your mission. We have some homework on the rank issue, and we're standing by and ready to be supportive, and on a few other homework items. But thank you so much. I know you have one.
Thanks to all of you. I mean, you provide us with the actual information that we need to do our jobs. You support the program here in Washington. We are there with the money that you spend on registrations. This is truly a partnership in every sense of the word. And so, to the like-minded governments in the room, but also to industry partners, just thank you for many, many years of support, and looking forward to even more.
Great. Well, join me in thanking Susan and Debbie.
Thank you so much, George, Susan, and DLJ, as I'm now going to call you. While my next group of panelists get mic'd up, one quick housekeeping item that I neglected to mention. If you're into social media, please feel free to join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag IP Attachés, so I'm not the only one tweeting. So next up, we have our panel of Latin American IP Attachés. It's going to be moderated by Jennifer Young, who is a Senior Director of International Policy at Pfizer, and part of her portfolio focuses on LATAM. Then we have Ann Chadovich, who is the IP Attaché based in Lima, Peru, Laura Hamill, who's the IP Attaché based in Rio de Janeiro, and Todd Reeves, who's the Attaché based in Mexico City. So Jennifer, if you're ready, you can come on up.
Great, we're all here. Well, first off, I want to just express thanks to GIPC, and in particular to Patrick, to Kelly, and to Ellen for the invitation. I think this is a fantastic opportunity that we have every year to really engage with the IP attachés and have a candid conversation, frankly, about the state of play as it's changing very rapidly, as we know each year. Also want to just thank each of you individually for your tremendous contributions. I know that you're all on the front lines shaping IP policy and representing the U.S. government, which is a huge challenge, and I think also a tremendous honor for all of us to have the opportunity to work with you, particularly from the business community perspective. This panel is focused on Latin America, and I think, as we all know, LATAM is uniquely positioned globally in the sense that there are a number of opportunities on IP. I think some of us in the business community in particular are encouraged by some of the strong negotiated outcomes, for example, in the USMCA. There's also a lot of opportunity, I think, with respect to engaging more closely with governments and with offices on the ground in the region, a lot of opportunity for capacity building. But also, on the other hand, we all know we're facing a lot of challenges. LATAM is a volatile region. I think as they're sort of coming into their own on the global stage in general, there's a lot of interest in trying to figure out, well, how does IP really benefit us from an economic perspective? How does it help drive innovation? And really, what's in it for us at the local level? So I leave it to you guys to sort of give us the sort of insights in terms of how you're engaging to shape the IP policy environment, both from sort of a challenges and opportunities perspective. So with that, Laura, I'll turn it over to you. I know that, Ann, you're going to go first. Okay.
Sure.
Perfect. So we'll turn over to Ann first.
And I was just going to talk about some of the things that have happened in the past year, a quick overview of the different things that have happened in my country, and then there's going to be time for questions afterwards. So first I'm going to start with some overall comments, and then I'll do it by topic rather than by country. Because there have been a lot of political changes. There's a new president, President Piñera in Chile, who's an economist by trade, and he generally favors IP rights in general and innovation. The longtime head of INAPI, the IP office in Chile, left in October. We expect the new head to be announced in the spring. This year, the Copyright Office in Chile moved from the Ministry of Education to the Ministry of Arts and Patrimony. And here in DC, the USPTO and INAPI signed a PPH and also an MOU on cooperation on patent classification. In Peru, there's a new president as well, President Vizcarra. While there's been a lot of turmoil in Peru with ministers leaving, the IP folks and the IP policy have stayed the same. So that's a good thing. Peru is going to join the global PPH in January. It joined the Singapore Treaty on the Law of Trademarks Protocol this past year, and it joined the Beijing Treaty on Copyright the past year. Colombia's got a new president too. President Ivan Duque started in August. He's an economist also and an innovation and IP friend. He's appointed a new head of IP at their IP office. A concern is that he has no IP experience, but the two subject matter directors, patents and trademarks, are still there. The new administration is preparing the new National Development Plan, which will likely be forwarded to Congress in February. That will let us know kind of what the administration policy plans are. Ecuador's president, Lenin Moreno, has been in office about a year and a half there. Ecuador seems more open to cooperation with and input from the U.S. Their IP office, YEPI, has changed. Now it's Senati. During this year, last year, if you recall, they issued a total rewrite of all their IP laws, the Código Ingenious. And in September, they issued implementing regulations. The USG has filed comments. We've participated in roundtables. They are being very transparent about everything. We'll see what happens soon. The Ecuadorian government has specifically noted regarding data protection and IP enforcement that they need greater stakeholder engagement and that they need stakeholders to reach out to health and law enforcement officials. So I'm passing that on to stakeholders. Please reach out. And after nearly a decade now, the U.S. and Ecuador has begun Trade and Investment Committee talks. So that's the general overview. Now let's talk about some IP issues that have happened during the year until I run out of time. I'm going to do these by topic, not by country. So first I'll do pharma issues, and these are not all patent. There's some trademark and other kinds of issues too. The goal in the region, their focus is on lowering costs. They're now focusing on this topic, not just in IP areas, but in all areas. The focus is on lowering costs. For example, in October, Chile, Argentina, Peru, and Colombia signed an agreement to jointly purchase medicines to take advantage of bulk pricing and lower costs. I'll talk a little bit about compulsory licenses. In Chile, a declaration of public interest was issued by the last government in March, finding that there were sufficient public health reasons to support a compulsory license on medicines related to Hep C virus, sofosbuvir, and other drugs associated with it. In August, the new minister, Gilead, appealed it, and in August, the new minister upheld the DPI. So the DPI is in effect in Chile. No compulsory license petition had been filed, at least as of last week when I left, at INAPI. Now, in Colombia as well, there'd been a process to issue a DPI for vague patented Hep C. It was even vaguer than Chile. And Colombia's law requires that you say which patent. They didn't even say, the drug, the patent, the owner, anything. The process is still pending. No DPI has been issued yet. From what I'm hearing from people on the ground in Colombia, they believe that under the new government, the focus will shift to price fixing as opposed, because Colombia does have price setting bodies. There's drug labeling laws that are important. I want to report a success. Yay, we like those. Last year I talked about Decree 385, or I talked about Decrees 522 and 1159. They were concerning because they required expired patented drugs to use the name generic medicine instead of their brands. A new decree was issued to take that place. People seem to be happy with that. Chile has a very concerning and complicated Ley de Fármacos 2 that's pending. It deals with both compulsory licensing and drug labeling laws. The new government has issued some indications that will relieve the concerning trademark parts of it, but it still has to be voted on, and the new government's party doesn't have a majority in the lower house. Plus, then over 200 individual amendments have been, some are very IP concerning, introduced by legislators. They all have to be voted on individually. So those are all issues where we don't even have a text yet because everything has to be voted on. The government is expecting that it will be out of the lower committee by January 31st. I think we would say that's fairly ambitious because of all these amendments that need to be voted on, and then it'll need to go to the plenary, and then there will be changes. It'll need to go back to the Senate, so we'll see what happens. There are nutritional labeling laws in the region. Chile has the most concerning one where trademarks that have characters and things like that on packaging have been banned. So no Tony the Tigers, no Dancing M&Ms, they're all covered. The new packaging are covered with stickers. That is concerning. There was a challenge, Evercrisp challenged that, and they argued that their trademark was for product differentiation, not for advertising. The Civil Court of Santiago said that it constitutes advertising. Okay, 1 minute. So Peru and Ecuador are also implementing nutritional labeling laws, and we're watching them, but we don't expect the same kind of issues. Copyright, Colombia signed a new law that dealt with long overdue FTA implementation. They implemented the TPMs, the RMIs. Chile signed a satellite piracy legislation, long overdue FTA implementation as well. Latin America has a big growth in recorded music revenue, like double the world average, and I think that will only increase, so that is another bright spot.
Thanks, Anne. That's tremendously helpful, and I know sort of a whirlwind tour of South America, but it's clear that given a lot of political changes in the region, that could create a number of new opportunities to work with those governments on IP.
Yes, and I think they're all at least as likely more receptive than previous governments.
That's encouraging. Great, so Laura, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thanks so much, Jennifer, and thank you to GIPC for inviting us to be here today. It's really a pleasure to see so many familiar faces, friends, and colleagues in the room this morning. I think similarly in my region, there's many opportunities for continued strong engagement in the region, as well as increased and intensified engagement. I think that from my perspective, the USPTO has really enjoyed strong collaborative dialogues and relationships with the various governments in my region. As many of you know who follow Brazil, we had an election this year, a presidential election, and we'll have a new president taking office on January 1st. I think so far what we've already seen is that there will be opportunities for intensified U.S.-Brazil dialogues, relationships on a variety of areas. Bolsonaro did not mention IP at all during his campaign. However, he did campaign on several important issues issues, including improving the Brazilian economy, as well as increasing public security. I'm hopeful that these two platforms will translate into additional resources being dedicated to not only the protection of IP at a faster pace than what we are currently experiencing, as well as more resources dedicated to stronger IP enforcement. We've also engaged in a very constructive dialogue with the government of Argentina that we expect to continue and intensify in 2019. We have seen a number of positive developments in the region. In particular, we've been talking about the backlog in Brazil for many, many years. It's been a hugely challenging area, and the positive side on that front is that actually on the trademark side, the backlog has been solved, according to INPI, and they expect to get their backlog from 1 year, where it is currently, down to 6 to 8 months, and we'll be expecting them to accede to the Madrid Protocol in 2019. Legislation has been moving in Brasilia, and that's greatly anticipated to happen in the coming months. So that's positive. Patents, however, remain a challenging area, as I think we all know. While the backlog issue in Brazil still remains, there has been some chipping away at the backlog. The last figure I saw several months ago was there were still 225,000 unexamined patent applications. I believe the goal by the end of the year is to get that to 200,000. Still a tremendous backlog at 10.23 years, more or less. The USPTO renewed our PPH with Brazil this year. We added IT to the existing PPH, which covered oil and gas and petrochemicals for applications going into Brazil. We don't have those limitations at the USPTO. We hope that this is helpful to our stakeholders, and we are continuing to negotiate to further expand that, to provide more assistance there with the backlog. But on the backlog, I would like to touch on something that I touched on last year, this proposed simplified procedure, which entails removing pharmaceutical pending patent applications and an automatic granting of the rest, essentially, unless there was a subsidy filed, which is like an opposition, or the stakeholder request removal from this process. This stalled a little bit. The discussions around this concept stalled a bit, but people have been mentioning it again. So it's something that we're keeping an eye on. I think it's widely viewed as the only way to resolve this situation because the appropriate amount of resources just haven't been dedicated to this area. But I'm hopeful that the new government will recognize that this is an issue and provide other ways of resolving this challenge. And on that note, I would mention that a number of ministers who will be coming under the Bolsonaro administration are trained in the U.S. And very friendly to the U.S., so I think that we'll enjoy an opportunity to have an even stronger dialogue in the next administration. It's been speculated that some of the ministries may merge, some offices may be moved around. What that means for us in the IP space is that we've heard potentially that INPI may move from Majiki, the Commerce Ministry, which will actually also be merged into a super economy ministry, but INPI may move to the Ministry of Science and Technology. This hasn't been confirmed, but it's certainly something that we're keeping an eye on. In addition, the Ministry of Culture will be merged with most likely the Ministry of Education. And what does this mean for the various developments that have occurred in this space? We're not sure yet. We're not sure whether the Secretary of Copyright and Innovation that was created, or of IP that was created this year will remain in the role, but we're hopeful that these positive developments that we've seen under the Temer administration will indeed continue. Some other things to keep an eye on in the patent space. Pharmaceutical patents, of course, remains a very delicate area in the region. In 2017, we had a joint resolution that came out of a negotiation between INPE in Brazil and Anvisa regarding Anvisa's role in the prior consent process for pharmaceutical patent applications. And from what we've heard from stakeholders, including many of you in the room, is that that alleviated your concerns regarding Anvisa's role in the process. Well, legislation has been recently introduced in Brasilia to not only reinstitute Anvisa's role in issuing the prior consent, but to strengthen that. So it's something we're keeping an eye on. We also had an interesting decision come out of a court in Brazil on the sofosbuvir drug. INPE granted a patent for sofosbuvir, and this happened just before the presidential election, and a presidential candidate at that point in time, Marina Silva, filed a case to essentially annul the grant of this patent. And a preliminary injunction was issued that said that INPE failed to take into account their obligation to consider the social, economical, technological interests of Brazil in granting the patent, which was kind of interesting and concerning. And this is currently going through litigation, and INPE is engaged in requesting reconsideration of this decision. So it's something that they're standing behind, their decision to grant the patent. So we're also keeping a close eye on this as well. Also, other challenges, restrictive patentability criteria in the region. We're looking forward to engaging in more constructive dialogues on all of these issues with these various governments. And the last thing I'll mention, so I don't take too much time, is that enforcement is still greatly challenging. We have not only increasing online piracy as an area, especially in Brazil, that has been, really flagged as a concerning area by stakeholders, and we're looking forward to having more engagement in this area next year. But also the physical markets in my area that have been really long-standing great challenges, still remain largely greatly challenging, and in some cases even deteriorated. So we're hoping that the various governments will be able to, not only with our support, but also with increased resources, be able to help combat these areas.
Great, thank you so much for that comprehensive overview. It's clear that there are a number of sort of both challenges and opportunities in Brazil, and I think Brazil is obviously a very important player, not only regionally, but globally within BRICS fora and others that is often looked to from an IP perspective. So definitely appreciate all of your work in continuing to engage on those issues on the ground.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Todd, I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer, and thank you to the GIPC, the U.S. Chamber, for hosting us again this year. This is, I think, my 6th time on this stage, or actually the stage. 3 years in Geneva and then 3 years in Mexico. And this will be my last one unless I go for a 3rd round, which I don't think I'm ready for that right now. But it's been incredibly rewarding helping U.S. stakeholders and really trying to get the pro-positive IP message out to the governments in my region. So I'll just do a really quick update on Mexico. Who would have thought Mexico would have pivoted left and Brazil pivoted right? I don't think any of us could really anticipated that. In Mexico, we're 2 weeks into the new administration. We have a name for the MP, the Mexican Patent and Trademark Office. We're going to cultivate that relationship. We understand there's not a lot of IP experience there, but hopefully we'll be able to continue the very good work that Mike Margain, the former MP Director General, did. On that note, 2018 was a very good year legislatively, depending on how you look at things. There were 2 rounds of legislative amendments to the industrial property law. The first one included geographical indications and industrial designs. That was back in March, April of this year. And I've got to really hand it to the Mexican government. They were negotiating with us on USMCA, or previously NAFTA 2.0, the Europeans, as well as EFTA, the European Free Trade Association or Agreement. So trying to deal with our very different ways of approaching GIs was quite complicating. But the Mexicans, I think, did a fairly good job in kind of threading that needle. Yes, it's a sui generis system. We have concerns with those. But they did build into it transparency and an opposition right. So it's not an automatic right as it is in some other countries. And then with industrial designs, the changes will allow Mexico to move forward on Hague accession. Director General Margain, former Director General Margain, wanted to do this before he left. But because of the transition and everything else going on in Mexico, that's been put off, but hopefully we'll see something move forward fairly soon. The second round of amendments to the industrial property law took place, I think, April, May, and they involve strengthening the trademark opposition system, which in my country, my region, as well as other regions, bad faith trademark filings are a huge problem. They prevent US companies, European companies, from moving into the markets because a bad actor is holding on to that right and basically trying to extort money before they can register and protect and enforce their rights. So in the second round of amendments, there's a definition of bad faith filing, of bad faith applications, and a grounds for refusal all the way through the process. So that was a very positive step. As far as court cases, there haven't been a lot. I think when I spoke last year, I talked a little bit about the uptick in patent infringement cases in Mexico. Those persist, and they essentially stem from, if you talk to a lot of practitioners, U.S. innovative pharmaceutical companies in Mexico, they'll tell you, 90% of the time the linkage system between COFEPRIS and MP works okay. But it's that 10% of the time, the really high revenue generating medicines, that it kind of breaks down. I wonder why. So we have been trying to kind of link, pardon the pun, link COFEPRIS and MP and get them to talk about what is the problem, because MP will tell you, we can only answer the question the way in which COFEPRIS presents it to us. You talk to COFEPRIS and they tell you, we can only ask the question the way that MP tells us to ask the question. So we were very close to setting up a meeting and trying to get a kind of a free-flowing discussion going on between the two agencies. And then the election, the transition kind of started moving forward, and everybody was dealing with securing their jobs past December 1st. So it kind of fell to the back burner a little bit. So we're still continuing on that push. What else? USMCA, I think there's a presentation after this panel. Interested to kind of see, hear what your thoughts are on that. And then finally, one of the wins, we don't see a lot of wins in what we do, but one of the wins is the kind of the shifting position of PGR, the Attorney General's office, on the in-transit issue. And if you listened to me last year and maybe the year before, PGR investigators and prosecutors were unable to take cases for criminal prosecution without some kind of impact on the Mexican economy. And it was kind of understood that there could never be an impact on the Mexican economy if goods were simply moving through. Forget about diversion, boxes falling off the back of the truck and winding up into Pito. They weren't really focusing on that. So we, in collaboration with AmCham and some other associations in Mexico, reached out to PGR, the Inspector General's office, and were able to kind of change that 6 or 7 year old policy. They do have the power, PGR does have the power to take these cases now, but we're hearing from stakeholders that they're really not exercising it yet. So hopefully with USMCA kind of solidifying that or bolstering that, we'll see some progress. So I think that's it. Happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Todd. Really appreciate the updates, and in particular on the legislative front in Mexico recently. We do have about 10 minutes for audience Q&A, so wanted to give folks the opportunity, to the extent you have questions, to ask the attachés in LATAM. Any questions?
Thank you. I'm Javier Fernandez with CropLife Latin America, and I think, well, Anne mentioned Maximiliano's departure from TINAPI, but maybe Laura, we had also a interesting departure from Patricia Stanley from Paraguay, so maybe a thought on that. And also I think Margain is going to leave or left INPI. So I don't know if that's an opportunity. There's going to be a new generation of INPI. Maybe the three of you, your thoughts about opportunities with that change of guard in IP offices in the region.
I can take that as far as Mexico. Yes, it is a change of guard. It is an opportunity, like I mentioned earlier. The person who's been named to take over for Mike Margain doesn't have a lot of IP experience. He does come from Pemex, the state oil company, in the fertilizers division, so maybe that has some connection with CropLife, but on the IP side, I understand it's a little bit light. In any transition, what we're worried about most, we know that generally the head of the office will leave, but what we're worried most about is the deputies and the people that are really responsible for carrying out the work. We're hearing, Claudia and I are hearing, on an hourly basis, so-and-so is resigned, so-and-so is leaving to go somewhere else. So that is happening quite fast. When they'll have a new team up and running, we just don't know. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll get in, we'll meet with the new team, not just at MP, but at other agencies and ministries, and continue what I consider a very good working relationship with the Mexican government.
So with regard to Paraguay, we were of course sorry to see that Dr. Stanley did indeed leave DINAPI. A new director has been appointed in her place, Joel Talavera. We haven't yet had a chance to visit him, but we're looking forward to doing so and hopefully continuing the strong collaboration that the USPTO has had with DINAPI under his administration. I would also mention with regard to Brazil, it's unclear regarding the leadership of INPI under the Bolsonaro administration. It appears that President Pimentel might be interested in staying on, and we've enjoyed a very strong relationship with him. So if he stays on, that would be wonderful, but we certainly will definitely continue that strong relationship in 2019 in Brazil.
And with Maximiliano leaving, that was obviously a big loss. He'd been there so long. But we're not, I have no reason to believe yet that it would be a change in policy there. I think, he'd been there a long time. He was ready to retire. Now, in Ecuador, there is a new head of IP at SIC, as I said, who has no IP experience. But so far, the directors of patents and trademarks have stayed. So we'll have to watch that to see if there will be any change in direction at the office. I'm sorry, Colombia. I said Ecuador, Colombia is sick.
Great,
Sorry.
thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, maybe I'll take the opportunity to ask a question. So, as you know, I think there's a lot of interest from the business community and other interested stakeholders to help support the USPTO IP Attaché efforts on the ground in the region. Wondering if you could share some thoughts in terms of potentially how we can help support the work that you're doing, if there are areas in particular that you feel we could be more engaged on.
Well, one thing, you can reach out to me a lot more. When you have issues, call me. Report to me. I'll let you know. If I see issues and I know who you are, I can call and tell you. But unless I know who you are, I can't do that. So reach out to me often and early in the process. If you've gone through the whole process and lost, it's a little late. So try to reach out early, and I'm sure there are also, if you call and we talk, ways to work together with both meetings with government officials, training programs, whether they be enforcement, public awareness, technical IP. There are all kinds of programs that we can and do. We generally have really good relations with the government people there, so can help facilitate programming.
Great.
I would echo much of what Anne said, and I would say please do contact me regardless of whether you have an issue or not. If you're interested in hearing about the IP landscape in the region that I cover, I'd be delighted to have a regular dialogue with you rather than just once a year or periodically every couple of months. That's what I'm here for, so please utilize me. And in addition to the other points that Anne noted, I think I've already been speaking with some of you about developing an ongoing constructive dialogue in my region, in Brazil in particular. And I think that really that's very exciting and an excellent way to support the work that we're doing, to complement the work that we're doing. And I'm really excited about doing that in 2019 under the new administration and helping you and working together with you. So, thank you.
And just to reiterate, come to us early. Once an issue becomes a case, there's very little we can do. But if it comes in, let's say, going back to like patent linkage, and we can identify a systemic problem, we can go in and talk to the authorities. But once it goes to the courts, there's very little we can do. So again, as Anne and Laura said, come to us early and often.
Great. Well, unless there are any other questions from the audience, I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for sharing your insights and expertise today. And again, just thank you on behalf of GIPC and the business community. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much to Jennifer and all of our panelists for that. It's always good to hear about positive developments that are happening in Latin America, as well as the challenges that we continue to face and how we can work on them together. So we're going to take a quick break in our IP Attaché panels for a presentation from me. So you all know me by now, but I wear many hats at GIPC. I'm responsible for engagement with Canada and Australia and their relevant trade agreements. I am our International IP Index Sherpa, and I am our IP Attaché enthusiast and evidently MC. But I wanted to take a minute to tell you about a piece of research that the GIPC put together that looks at our index and the USMCA. But maybe just to step back for a minute, you guys all know GIPC, but in our engagement around the world, we work with countries to celebrate the ways that IP supports the growth of innovative and creative industries. And nowhere is this more true than in North America. Across the region, we have innovators and creators that are investing in the next generation of creative content and game-changing medical devices and technologies. And these underpin North American competitiveness. In the US alone, the US biopharmaceutical industry annually adds $1.3 trillion to the American economy, while the film and recording industries likewise add $10.3 and $15 billion in revenue, respectively. So this is why the modernization of the North American Free Trade Agreement was so critical to the innovative and creative communities across the US, Canada, and Mexico. Intellectual property protections, we like to say, provide innovators and creators with the legal certainty that's needed to invest in 21st century content, technologies, and medicines. And in order to continue to inspire that investment, there must be a strong legal framework in place across North America. So to illustrate the importance of IP protection to continued North American growth and competitiveness, the U.S. Chamber commissioned research to benchmark the IP standards in the original NAFTA and the recently signed USMCA agreement against the standards included in our International IP Index. So we're now in the 6th edition of the index, and it benchmarks the IP framework in 50 global economies across 40 different indicators that are critical to IP-intensive industries. The standards that we include in our index are what we believe illustrate a true gold standard for IP protection and what that could look like in markets around the world. So by benchmarking both NAFTA and the USMCA, we were able to illustrate how far IP standards have come since NAFTA was entered into force back in 1994. So when we looked at the original NAFTA, it scored about 48% of the total possible index score, while the USMCA encompasses about 80% of the IP standards benchmarked in our index. So this data illustrates, in many ways, how the USMCA includes 21st century protection and could create a new global floor for IP and free trade agreements in some areas. The USMCA specifically strengthened the IP provisions in a number of ways, which we believe will benefit IP-intensive industries. So in the life sciences space, I'm sure all of you know, the agreement established a 10-year term of regulatory data protection for biologics, but also included an expanded definition of biologics, which industry was grateful to see, and provides for patent term restoration. In the area of enforcement, the agreement allows ex officio border enforcement against all suspected counterfeit goods, including those in transit. I was particularly grateful to see that. I've been lobbying the Canadian government on it for 5 years, and it's finally come to fruition, so that's wonderful. And then finally, the USMCA also included some strengthened copyright provisions, including a longer term of protection, digital rights management, and technological protection measures, and exceptions and limitations limited to the 3-step test. However, we do recognize that some uncertainty remains due to the cultural carve-out, which excludes a whole sector of the Canadian economy from the terms of the agreement. So our data illustrates that if that cultural exception was utilized, it would result in a 10% drop in USMCA's index score and would make the agreement weaker than the original TPP. And while the majority of the IP chapter is a positive step forward, we believe the agreement sets a new global floor because we recognize that there's always room to go up from here. I'm an eternal optimist, so there's always room for improvement. So we're looking to future FTAs to hopefully include some more robust mechanisms to combat copyright and trademark infringing content online. So we'll look forward to working on those free trade agreements to build off many of the positive aspects of NAFTA while also taking further steps to strengthen IP protection. And if you're like me and you just can't get enough of the index, anybody out there? Stay tuned. We're releasing the next edition of our index on February 7th, 2019. It will benchmark the same 50 countries against 45 indicators, so 5 of them are new, and it will include more information on this USMCA analysis. So we look forward to seeing all of you on the 7th to launch the new report and to celebrate the ways that IP-driven innovation and creativity drive economic growth and global competitiveness both across North America and around the world. And with that, I will put my MC hat back on, and we'll move to our next panel. So I'd like to call up to the stage Anna Dallaval, who is a vice president and intellectual property counsel at Ralph Lauren. She's going to be our moderator. Additionally, we have the IP Attachés from China, so Mike Mengelson, who's based in Shanghai, Duncan Wilson, who's based in Beijing, and Conrad Wang, who is currently based in Arlington, but will be headed to the region in the new year and will be in Guangzhou. So come on up.
Good morning, everybody. I echo the sentiment of, I think, everybody in the room in thanking the GIPC, USPTO, and the IP Attachés for this wonderful program. I am delighted to introduce our China panel. Duncan Williams serves as the IP Attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. Michael Mangelson, who serves as the IP Attaché at the U.S. Consulate in Shanghai. And Conrad Wang, who is currently a counsel in the China team in the Office of Policy International Affairs at the USPTO, but has been selected to serve as the IP Attaché in Guangzhou, China. So I will let them talk first about the work they do. They've been doing this year. I know this is a year event, so have their own presentation, and then we can have some questions. Please, Duncan, go ahead.
I'll start. So we have 3 attachés in China, as you probably know. Well, obviously you know now. And the 3 of us, I think, all have different things to highlight. So I'll just touch on 4 areas in my remarks, and then happy to answer any questions afterwards. So obviously a very hectic and interesting year for intellectual property in China. We saw a significant reorganization of the IP enforcement and protection agencies. We saw a few disappointing developments in IP and technology legislation. We saw continued development of China's courts and them increasingly being seen as a component of a global patent litigation strategy. And yet we've had companies continue to convey their very strong concerns that China's IP protection and enforcement system ultimately appear to bend to the will of the party and its economic objectives. So I'll just touch on those 4 things before handing it off to Mike. As I mentioned, we saw a reorganization of the IP protection enforcement agencies. China's IP office was renamed the IP administration and moved under a new massive market regulator called the State Administration for Market Regulation. The IP office now also reviews and examines trademarks and geographical indications in addition to patents and integrated circuit designs. An interesting development was the movement out of SIPO of its administrative enforcement authority. It's still too early to know what all those changes mean. All the pieces are still falling into place. But in the stated obligations and duties of this new IP administration, we see an increased confidence in China's own system. We see less reliance on foreign assistance in intellectual property. We see more of an effort to find Chinese solutions to specific Chinese IP problems. And certainly that affects our work in China. In terms of IP legislation, a couple of disappointments. We didn't see the latest draft of the patent law earlier this year. There was a vote, I think, last year to move it to the last week, to move it to the People's Congress. So we hope to see a draft by the end of the year. No copyright draft as well. It's been since 2012, so we'll keep waiting. We did see the e-commerce law, a law that the U.S. government commented multiple times on with multiple drafts, pressing China to get the balance right between its e-commerce platforms and brand owners seeking to protect their rights. Unfortunately, the draft that was ultimately approved contained provisions which we hadn't seen, which seemed to tip the balance, in favor of China's e-commerce platforms. So that was disappointing. In March, we saw the State Council issue scientific data administration measures, broad, vague measures that appear to give control over data and possibly intellectual property coming out of research and development conducted inside China, particularly if it's funded by the Chinese government. So that was, that was concerning. Finally, just last week, we saw these new punishments in regards to patents. I'm happy to talk more about those in detail, but this appears to be an extension of China's social credit system to the IP space and appears to take China in the direction of less transparency and far more discretion in how it punishes bad actors in the IP space. So that's, for us, not so good. Continued developments in the courts. I don't want to take up too much time. As I mentioned, quickly becoming a component of a global patent litigation strategy. I'm sure many of you saw the news that Qualcomm was able to obtain interlocutory injunctions against Apple for the sale of the iPhone in China. That was in the Fuzhou courts, where we've had a number of significant cases involving high technology companies. Damages, however, of course, remain very low. Average damages for patent infringement, about $20,000 US. And it still remains to be seen how Chinese courts will be responding to what we see as a wave of suits from non-practicing entities, including China's own NPEs. Still, reforms continue. 16 IP tribunals set up after the successful 3-year IP court program. China continues to research evidence production methods and case precedent systems. And as of January 1st, the Supreme People's Court will now hear appeals of technically complex IP cases. So that'll be a significant change in how companies litigate their IP in China. Finally, as I mentioned, the treatment of certain U.S. technology companies this year and certainly in years past that these companies have received at the hands of China's IP enforcement authorities, including the patent infringement lawsuits filed against Micron this year, suggests that China's increasingly advanced IP enforcement system can be at times hijacked to advance national and local industrial policy goals. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Duncan. So this is my fifth and I think final opportunity to speak at the Chamber. I'd like to thank the Chamber for all of the engagement over the last 5 years that I've been in China, and also to the industry and everyone here who has engaged us in China, which I think is probably the most valuable asset that we can be for you in China, is to help you with your issues. And so I encourage everyone to reach out to us. I think, in fact, Ralph Lauren is a good example. Anna, I've worked with her and her team in China for a number of years. I think the first time I met you in person, Anna, was at a Consul General IPR Roundtable in Shanghai at the consulate a couple years ago. And obviously, we've had other opportunities to engage. And to have that, I think that not only to engage, your local IP councils and to be able to engage with the government is very important in addressing some of, I think, the larger issues that companies face. In China, we still see, obviously, I think that Section 301 has come to the forefront of, especially in the media, in our engagement with China relating to IP. We obviously still see it's probably the most common issues that our rights holders are facing in the area of bad faith trademark filings, inability to protect brands, which also lead to an inability and an ineffective means of going against counterfeiting. And then also enforcement, I think, has also been a big issue. I look back on my 5 years, and I think that this 2018 has definitely been a rough year for IP in China. And probably the most disappointing year, and I'm grateful that I still have 6 more months, and hopefully we can turn things around, if not in the next 80 days, at least during my IP Attaché lifetime. As Duncan mentioned, it's been disappointing to see a number of the amendments in the copyright law, the patent law, and other measures that we were hopeful and were planned to be released this year, not be released, and then also watered down. We had the State Council last week who announced the approval of patent law amendments that now need to go to the National People's Congress. And we look forward to receiving a draft of that, but we understand preliminarily that is not going to include patent linkage, regulatory data protections, patent term extension. And there's also been rumors that it's not going to include the protection of partial designs, which is something that was in a prior draft, and that would be very disappointing, I think, if that was the case. To see these things being watered down is obviously very disappointing. It's also been disappointing, I think, from the working level this year to have probably the least amount of engagement in cooperative programs that we've had in my tenure, and also to see us being denied access to international programs where our like-minded friends are participating and speaking. most recently China International Import-Export that was held in Shanghai. Unfortunately, we still have, I think, good engagement at the local levels through our relationships. And I just want to also say that we have, I'm just so fortunate to be sandwiched between these two IP attachés because they are really superstars. And I think that it's going to be, I think we're going to probably have the most effective team that we've ever had in China in the IP Attaché program. This will be the first time, I think, in 6 years where we have 3 IP Attachés there at the same time. And we also have a full complement of IPR specialists that are very talented. Shout out to Danielle for covering Guangzhou for so long and waiting for our Laoban to come, and hopefully he'll be out there in January. But I think that that industry will have now an opportunity when they're struggling with the counterfeiting that typically happens in Conrad's district down in Guangzhou area and in Fujian province. You'll have someone on the ground there to help you with those issues. I think that also some other areas that have been disappointing is to see this narrative that China has tried to use to counter some of the criticism that's come out and become more visible this year as part of the Section 301 process. And the narrative you see repeated in media and in all of these international events daily, where China is characterizing itself as a world leader in IP protections by focusing on numbers. It's a numbers game, focusing on the high number of patent filings, number one in the world, patent filings and patents registered, number one in trademark filings, and now also an emphasis to try to legitimize those numbers through international organizations by also subsidizing filings meant to focus on PCT filings now. We see in Shanghai introducing subsidies now, going away from the traditional subsidies of just filing utility model patents or design patents, which are now going to be eliminated. And I think that's a positive development, frankly, that we're focusing more on commercializing IP and what does IP mean? What do the patents number mean? It's not enough just to have a patent filed. How are you utilizing those patents? So I think they are starting to understand that better and how that plays into innovation. But to focus now on subsidizing, giving the largest subsidies, which are now I think are at $7,500 per application per country for PCT filings, even much higher than Paris Convention filings for patents, in an effort to try to become number one in PCT filings. Now they're also doing the same with Madrid Protocol to try to become number one in Madrid Protocol filings to legitimize their narrative that they are number one in the world in patent protection. And if you take, we can talk about this all day, if you take a look at those numbers and what's behind those numbers, and unfortunately we have international interlocutors that now at conferences throughout China are also touting this as well. Look at China, they're number one in protecting IP. Look at these numbers. Without any discussion of quality, we know that over 74% of trademark filings and active registrations in China are bad faith filings. And so if you have a majority of your filings that are either invalid or made in bad faith, I mean, we have to shine light on that. This problem with trademark bad faith that unfortunately Ralph Lauren and many other companies are having to deal with in China, it's a cancer on the registry in China, and it's now infecting our Patent and Trademark Office registry as well. We see an explosion of filings coming from China, bad faith trademark applications to take advantage of these subsidies to try to characterize China as a global leader in global brands. And so I think I'll leave it at that. I'm almost at the point where I think I'm like Susan. I don't have an Italian background, but I'm almost ready to cry. Maybe I need to have Susan come up. This would be appropriate time, I think, to have her cry. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Conrad Wong. Mike, I just want to thank you very, very much for their very complimentary words, and I'm very pleased not only to be here up with my two colleagues, but also with the Patent and Trademark Office China team and OPIA here in Alexandria. As many of you know, that's where I am right now. I am due to report to post probably in the first quarter of 2019. I also want to give a shout out to the Chamber, particularly to Ellen. Thank you so much for always staying in contact with us and reaching out to the China team. I speak a little bit now more from the perspective of headquarters as I head back out. I was in Guangzhou from 2007 to 2012, so the last time I was up here was 2011 to be able to share our observations and to hear your thoughts as well. In the intervening years, which hasn't been that long, all of you have seen how much China has evolved and changed. The narrative is still there in my district, and by the way, just so that you know where I'm at, in Guangzhou, that is southern and southwestern China. So we cover Guangdong, Fujian province, Hainan Island, the Guangxi Zhuang autonomous region, as well as Hong Kong and Macau. There's a lot of activity down there. You've heard about some of the litigation that's going on with regard to Micron in Fujian province and the perpetual enforcement challenges that we have down there. The port of Shenzhen, the city of Shenzhen, it's a rather innovative city in terms of some have thought that it's a model a little bit now for the new state administration for market regulation. So there's a lot of different drivers going on here. But as Mike has said, we are observing very carefully from the perspective of headquarters the increase, and it's quite if you were to see the graph, you would see this sort of very steep incline of Chinese applications coming in, Chinese origin applications for patents. Same thing too with trademarks. Some of it due to subsidies. But I think also it is a central government policy that the government wants to put itself on the stage in terms of intellectual property. They want to grow their brands. I would remind everyone that when you look at some of those Chinese marks, they're just, it seems like an amalgamation of just letters from a typewriter, QWERTY or something like that. But Kodak was, of course, a coined term that became synonymous with film here in the United States. So where this is all going, it's hard to say, but we are witnessing this. We're dealing with it. We're addressing it. We're on top of it to the extent that we can be. I want to also point out that, at least from the perspective of headquarters, we still are having dialogue with the Chinese government, albeit more at the provincial level. So we have had visitors from Guangdong province, from Shanghai, from Ningxia. So we're still speaking at the staff level with folks and still exchanging our views. We've also spoken with officials from the Chinese embassy, specifically from the Ministry of Commerce. So it's not that there's no dialogue or anything like that going on. It's still occurring. One of the interesting facets with regards to what we see here in terms of what the Chinese are discussing with us when they want to come talk to the Patent and Trademark Office, but also what we see at conferences in China is now the theme of IP commercialization, the use of intellectual property as a tool of industrial development policy. So while the narrative is always there about counterfeiting, piracy, all those types of issues, they are trying to learn more about, we have a lengthy discussion with one group about the Bayh-Dole Act. How do you use intellectual property as collateral in commercial transactions? So there is an increasing sophistication and appreciation of China in the way they're using their intellectual property to evolve the economy. And of course, a lot of you have seen how it's going from that manufacturing base model into one that's based on innovation. You all have seen their investment in aerospace, in their own space program. These are very capital intensive projects that have dual use applications. So there's definitely a lot going on. I will speak just very quickly about what's happening in southern China. Again, yes, we have enforcement challenges, but we have now had in there now the fourth year the Guangzhou IP Court, along with Beijing and Shanghai, and other now IP tribunals in other cities as well. So That is what we hear from anecdotally from the rights holders, that the courts, those courts are staffed by professionals who are trained in patents, trademarks, and copyrights. The decisions are based on fact, they're not speculation. Whether or not there's elements of local protectionism or anything of that nature, of course, that enters into the mix. It's a bit subjective. But it seems in general that's a positive development for rights holders. Also, we've spoken about the Internet Court. The big one is in Hangzhou, in Mike's district in Shanghai. That's been around, what, for a year now, I believe?
Yeah, 16 months.
Right. And in Guangzhou, that's relatively new. I think it's only been stood up now for about 2 months, so the jury's a little bit out on its effectiveness and whether or not they're impartial and well-reasoned determinations. But at least they're at least putting their foot forward on that. I will just close my remarks by saying that we have a very strong interagency team, both here in the United States and at Post, whether it's in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou. I also cover the consulate in Chengdu in Sichuan province. We're able to work with, of course, the State Department, the Commercial Service, but also with our law enforcement partners. We can't do our stuff without ICE or FBI or CSIPs, you know, some of whom I see my friends here today. So this is, and we're speaking in real time at Post through our phone calls, dialogues, emails, and that sort of thing. And we're also doing things here at home as well. So it's a group effort, and we very much appreciate also the input and the visits, as all of my colleagues have already said, of folks coming in and speaking to us at Post overseas or at headquarters. So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, there's been so much in the past year alone in China. So many legislative developments, administrative developments. Before we talk a little bit more about some of those, I would like to ask more of a general question, which I think it's on the mind of a lot of people in the room. And it is, has to do really how are the trade tension impacting the intellectual property protection in China, and how is that affecting your day-to-day job? Anybody would like to?
I can start just from the perspective in Beijing. I think there's a couple of ways of looking at it. One is how are the trade tensions affecting U.S. businesses that seek to protect and enforce their IP in China, and one, how is it impacting the ability of the IP Attachés to do their jobs? Just starting with me. You know, the embassy tracks this very carefully, whether China is taking any sort of retaliatory actions or coercive measures against U.S. companies in response to the trade tensions is something we care very much about. In the IP space, in Beijing, we haven't seen a lot of evidence that there's been any sort of systemic decision to not protect U.S. IP, U.S. intellectual property. I think it's inevitable that there will be individuals, whether they're judges or police officers or customs enforcement officials, et cetera, that personally make a biased determination because the rights holder is American. That was true before. It might be even more true now that there's a bit of tension. But again, no systemic issue. I mean, I think the view from Beijing is that it wouldn't fit China's PR campaign, which is that it is a protector of intellectual property. And then they're not going to take actions to undermine that. In terms of our outreach with China, we continue to have meetings. I've had good meetings with all the key IP agencies as well as the courts. The trade tensions have not been mentioned at a single meeting. So we continue to do that. We continue to find opportunities for collaborative work with Chinese agencies on areas that we think will benefit rights holders the most in the current environment. Yeah, I better stop there.
You know, I think there's a lot of pressure on China now, as I mentioned before, to prove that it is strong in enforcing IP. That it has made it cautious, and IP is a very sensitive topic, and so especially at the central level. And so we see some pressure coming down to the provincial level and local levels, although we still have great relationships and I think good interaction, engagement with them. I mentioned how access has been an issue, especially for some of the international programming. that we traditionally participate in. Unfortunately, that's happening. But we have seen the highest levels of leadership talk about some of the most important issues that our rights holders are facing in the area of enforcement. President Xi at the Import Expo a few weeks ago again emphasized, and in his speech made the most specific promises relating to IP and promising to punish infringers and to introduce a punitive damages system. We have seen most recently with the NDRC announcement a week ago, also the patent law amendments, where there is more of an emphasis and effort, I think, to focus on enforcement. Unfortunately, those are more in the area of administrative enforcement, and in the NDRC announcement, that's going to use a social credit system that is going to shame those who are characterized as participating in serious bad or dishonest behavior. And so, obviously we want to see those reforms at the judiciary, at that level, come into the ability that our courts, and we have great relationships with the courts, and I think that they are doing what they can, especially the IP specialized courts in Shanghai. They're doing what they can to make it easier, as easy as they can under the laws that they're working with, to have rights holders be able to get the evidence they need to prove damages, so that they can take advantage of actual damages as opposed to low statutory damages. But they also acknowledge and recognize that there has to be changes to the law before they're going to be able to impose more significant damages. So that's important. I think just anecdotally, what we've heard from rights holders, we've had some rights holders reach out to us and complain that their cases have been placed on hold since the tariffs were imposed. I think that some of those are more high-profile cases, and I think it's the optics that are involved in ruling one way or the other in those cases and how that would be perceived. And so that has been an issue that some companies have had to face, but mostly in high-profile cases. We've also had a couple U.S. law firms talk to us about how they've seen patent prosecution or examination of their applications coming from the U.S. Be delayed. We did some surveying, and I surveyed over, I think, 10 different associations, law firms, and companies, just to see, if they were kind of seeing the same thing. About half of them did, but most of them didn't really characterize it or explain it in the context of, retaliation. It was mostly in the context of focusing on technologies and trying to give priority to technologies that have been identified under industrial policy as strategic emerging industries that they want to promote. And so related to that is also this last year we saw expedited patent examination process that you could apply for, and our understanding currently is that no U.S. rights holder has been able to take advantage of that, and they have been limited to those types of technologies that have been identified under industrial policy.
From my perspective, I think if there are any tensions, they're very subtle. As I indicated, we are still receiving requests to come and confer with us at the PTO's headquarters in Alexandria. As my colleagues have noted, the trade issues are not highlighted. They sort of maybe are told to stay away from it. It's still an ongoing dialogue. It's pleasant. It's not combative. It's not pointed or anything like that. Nobody starts pointing fingers and stabbing in the air and all that kind of stuff. We have noticed when we have done programs in China, however, it does get a little bit complex because, of course, now we're dealing with a reorganization, as Duncan's pointed out, of their IP agencies. So there's a shuffling of a lot of the personnel. There is more central government control over programming at the provincial level, so a lot of things have to be vetted up through Beijing. There sometimes doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason as to why, when we've been discussing or proposing a 2-day program for trademark examination, it suddenly is cut down to 1. But that's just the way it is. They just said, oh, it's bouffon bien, it's not convenient. to do 2 days, just 1 day. And then they will also subtly change some of the titles of various panels. We can't divine all this, but there just seems to be a little bit of some movement. Maybe some official got a little bit concerned about the optics, or we're too close to the Americans or something. We have no idea. But on the good side, the program goes forward. And so we are still reaching out to their examiners. We're reaching out to their folks. So it's not as if they've shut down completely on us the way those of you may remember from April of 2007 when there was a WTO case filed. I was there in Beijing, and they literally closed up and kind of, went to Florida or wherever they go for sun and fun. Hainan, yes, sorry, the Hawaii of the East. And so we don't see that. We don't see that.
Thank you. This is very useful information. So narrow it down to some of the legal issue. You mentioned that all 3 of your jurisdictions have IP specialized courts. But recently, the China Supreme Court actually has passed draft provision regarding the establishment of an IP court at the Supreme Court level. Do you have a sense of what kind of cases are they going to address and to focus on? And how do you think it will affect the IP right holders? And is this a good development, or is this more part of it showing the China is protecting the IP rights? Just want to get your sense on that.
So I'll just start. I think it was October 26th or the beginning of November that the SPC IP Appeal Tribunal was announced, and in that notice, it did lay out specifically the jurisdiction that the appeal tribunal will have. And I don't have it memorized, so I can't tell you, but it's technically complex IP cases. It's similar to the jurisdiction of the IP courts. Although it won't hear design patent cases, but utility model patent appeals, invention patent appeals. I actually have it in Chinese in front of me, but I don't want to read it. So that has been delineated. In terms of the impact, I think there's the optimist and maybe the realist. I think the hope is that this will lead to greater uniformity in Chinese IP practice. You'll have a centralization. You'll have all those important high technology cases going to the SPC. You also have a greater level of technical expertise at the SPC. Although, this it's going to be in 2,000 to 3,000 more cases being handled by the Supreme People's Court. It's really hard to understand how that's going to be practically possible. I think the pessimist or the realist would say that by funneling all these appeals through one tribunal, you have basically a bottleneck and an access point for controlling the outcome of politically sensitive to high technology cases. So we remain optimistic. Overall, it probably will be a positive thing, but we're going to be watching it very carefully.
Yeah, this is something we've pushed for many years now, and I think it, especially in the area of technical IP cases, it will cover patents, technical trade secrets, technology licensing types of cases. Unfortunately, it's not going to cover a lot of the other problems that many of our rights holders face, including the bad faith trademark stuff that Ralph Lauren is suffering from, and so hopefully we'll have that pilot program expanded to include those cases in the future as well.
And just to add, I think what we're hoping for, and of course I'm sure from the U.S. government perspective, but also from business perspective, is some degree of predictability, some idea at least as to which way the trend line is going. A lot of you have heard about the Supreme People's Court. They have judicial interpretations. They've issued a list of leading cases. As they've stressed over and over again, they are not necessarily precedent, but they do help with their decision making and their analysis, and we're hoping that that will also foster some degree of predictability, some way of being able to say, well, this is where we think things will shake out eventually.
Great, thank you. I don't know if we have time for more questions, But maybe one last question is we also mentioned the new e-commerce law and how it's affecting the IP right holders. I think it's really interesting, to dive a little bit deeper into the issue of liability allocation between the platform operators, the sellers, and the right owners. If you have any comments on that.
I'll just say very quickly, in the e-commerce law introduced, as I mentioned, two things. One is a strict liability standard for erroneous messages, erroneous notices sent by rights holders to the merchants. The U.S. system looks more at malicious, mistaken or erroneous messages. This is strict liability just if you make a mistake to be liable for damages caused to the merchant. Double damages if it was malicious. The other new twist was the introduction of a 15-day period after, if you file a notice with a merchant and they file a counter notice, which of course all these merchants will have ready to go because now it's in the law and it's a potential loophole. Once the platform receives that counter notice by the merchant, the 15-day clock starts. And within 15 days, you have to, as a rights holder, file suit in a Chinese court or file a complaint with an administrative authority. Otherwise, the platform can lift the takedown measures. This is a huge potential loophole for many reasons. 15 days is not very much time. It's not 15 business days. It's oftentimes very difficult for rights holders to get the kind of information that they need regarding the identity of the merchant to file that case. And it just seems to be a huge weight lifted off the shoulders of the e-commerce platforms with whom particularly small and medium-sized businesses have already struggled to get good enforcement from.
Very costly too.
Yeah, but one mention on e-commerce in particular, take a look at these internet courts as they come out. Hangzhou, we've had that up and operating for 16 months. I met with Chief Judge Du for a number of occasions. She's anxious to do more international cases, helping U.S. and foreign companies with their disputes and their issues that they face online. Take a look at the Peppa Pig case that just came out. A UK company that effectively used the Hangzhou internet court to get jurisdiction in Hangzhou, which you would much rather have than in Shantou, where the infringer was down in Guangdong province, using the internet court, and had a favorable decision from that. So that's also, I think, a positive development.
And just to close out, I think while there are some positives in the e-commerce law, as many of you know, there are still extremely burdensome notarization and consularization requirements, all this stuff about authenticating documents. I mean, you may have a part of the law that looks great, but then actually trying to get there, the elusive goal of these wonderful remedies, there's still a lot of obstacles in the way.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Duncan, Mike, and Conrad. We have so many more questions, but it's time to move on. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Anna, Michael, Duncan, and Conrad. That was a very interesting conversation on China, which is top of mind for a lot of people. So last but certainly not least, we have our Asia and the Middle East panel, which is going to be moderated by Kate Beal, who is an Associate Vice President of International Advocacy at Pharma. Then we have a number of IP Attachés and IP specialists. First, we'll have Shilpi Jha, who's the IP specialist based in New Delhi. We'll also be joined by Komal Kaha, who is also an IP specialist based in New Delhi. Then we have Peter Maravari, who's the IP attaché based in Kuwait City. He pointed out to me before this panel that his last name is very Mary, pronounced backwards, so now you'll remember that. And then finally, we have Kitasi Supapinda, who's the IP attaché based in Bangkok. So welcome.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. And like many of our colleagues have already mentioned, a big thank you to GIPC, USPTO, and in particular to our panelists here sitting on the stage. I'm thrilled on behalf of the biopharmaceutical industry to talk through your specific country and regional issues, both areas of opportunity and challenges that we're. Is my?
It's not audible. You're not audible. Yeah.
Am I on? Okay, now. Okay, great. Sorry, I'm also struggling with a cold, so a faint voice does not help without a mic. But I'd like to first and foremost start with a big thank you to GIPC and to the Chamber, in particular Patrick, Ellen, Himal, and Kelly for your strong partnership on behalf of the issues, on behalf of the pharmaceutical industry members, but also all the important business and innovative businesses and creators here in this room and beyond. Also a big thank you to USPTO, but in particular all of the representatives sitting here on this stage. I had an opportunity to partner with a number of you, Shilpi, Kitastri, and Komal in New Delhi, and with Patrick and Dom to carry this very important conversation forward, talking about the value of innovation and the intellectual property landscape in India, but then also how it impacts the region. So as we're rounding out the regional discussion today, today's learnings are very pertinent to the Asia and the Middle East and North Africa region, so very keen to hear the perspectives of the representatives here on stage, and then seek your guidance from a business community perspective of how we can deepen the partnership and carry these important policy discussions forward. So with that, I'd like to start with Shilpi to share your perspective with respect to your work in South Asia.
Good afternoon to all of you. I'm audible behind? Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank GIPC for inviting me. This is my first time here, and I'm quite excited and encouraged because that shows that industry is interested in my countries. So just to briefly touch upon which are the countries I cover. I cover Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal, Afghanistan. So these are the 7 countries which I handle, and there's a lot of positive development which have happened over the period of last 2 years. I'll briefly touch upon each of these countries just for you to understand where these countries are at, because many of you might not understand the importance of these countries right now, but having the fact that either you have interest in India or if you plan to invest in India, these are the countries that you should be looking forward to, because most of the country have a porous border with India. So the goods flows, inflows and exflows goes even if you don't want your product to be in the market. So I'll start with Pakistan. So in sometime in year 2012, Pakistan decided to integrate their IP management into one whole group, and they enacted an act called Intellectual Property Organization Act, which laid down various heads under which they could streamline their IP office working. Like they decided to have a IP judicial bench, and then having a proper framework for the IP office, proper kind of resource and all. So they had this IPO Act in 2012. After that enactment of IPO Act, they enacted 3 judicial benches, one in Islamabad, one in Lahore, and one in Karachi. And it has been last 2.5 years that those IP judicial bench has been working. And we have been working on a regular basis with these IP judges who have been put on the bench to train them on the various IP issues, because the way the judicial bench is functioning in Pakistan is that anybody in High Court who has the experience of working in High Court is being the job of handling IP benches. So they are not the specialized person. So what we are doing in last 2.5 years is that we have been working with them. Apart from that, under the IPO Act, they have also constituted a IPR task force, which meets every quarterly and the task force has representative from all possible stakeholders, which includes custom, police, judiciary, industry, and everybody. So these are few very positive movement, and frankly, they have been executing this on regular basis. Like when I say executing, their task force has been meeting on a quarterly basis to update industry where they are and to understand which are the loopholes or gap where they need to work upon. So far, they have been guided by Patent Act of 2000, Design Act of 2000, Copyright Act of 2000. But now with the formation of IPO, we are doing legislative amendment with them, and this we are on the third phase right now. Hopefully by next year, early next year, we'll have the amended IP legislation. So it is important for all of you present here, those who have interest in the region, to look into the draft as and when it is put on the website, and we'll be happy to let you know beforehand, or you can always get in touch with us to know when it is going to be published on website. They're also discussing to accede to the Madrid Protocol and to the PCT. Again, we have been training them on various ways that they can be acceding to the Madrid Protocol, and what are the amendments that they need with their present IP law to accede to the Madrid Protocol, so that once they have an amended legislation, they should not go for another round of amendment after signing a Madrid Protocol and PCT agreement. So that's pretty much in Pakistan. Then in Bangladesh, as you all know that Bangladesh enjoys a LDC status. So far, they do have a basic IPR framework, which is called Patent, Design and Trademark Act, but it is very inadequate. And with our dialogue on a regular basis, we are pushing government of Bangladesh to amend their IPR law. At the same time, we are doing a lot with the custom in Bangladesh to see that they can do the recordation, they can update the recordation process and start functioning on that. Most likely that will happen next year sometime. And there has been a IP working group being formed to look into how they can revamp their IP office, which is not in a very good shape right now. They recently passed the GI Act in 2013, and they have also amended their Trademark Act, which was last amended in 2012. And the rest of the IP law, we are working into it to see that it gets amended very soon. Again, they are looking into signing Madrid protocols, which is very positive. Moving to Nepal, Nepal is presently governed by Patent, Design and Trademark Law of 1965. However, last year, Nepal government has passed their national IP policy, under which they have planned to amend their IP law, and they are in the process of amending their IP law. The first cut on the IP legislation just took place last month, and hopefully we'll see the draft legislation on website by early next year. Again, another thing, they are also planning to do a lot of technical support for the universities on various aspects of IPR. So there we have planning to collaborate with WIPO. We are in talks with WIPO to see how we can help the universities in Nepal to see how they can come up to speed on IP and innovation culture. On Sri Lanka is so far governed by IP Act of 2003. Again, since I have said, there's a lot of positive development, all these countries which I am talking about today, they are amending their IP law, and this is the right time for industry folks to come forward and share their comment on it before it's done, and then we again have to push for some changes in the legislation. So Sri Lanka, so far it is being guided by 2003 law, but again they are amending their IP law. 2 years back, we're done with the IP custom recordation system, which is functioning very well. Just that there is some technical difficulties, but otherwise it works very well in Sri Lanka. We have done a number of training in Sri Lanka with our custom border enforcement people. Few of them are sitting here. And they have already done the procedure to accede to the Madrid Protocol, and hopefully it was supposed to be announced this December, but unfortunately because of the government disturbance there, it is being pushed to early next year. And there is a very interesting thing in Sri Lanka that we have been doing is that we along with WIPO, we have collaborated with 14 top universities to see and help them draft their IP law with specific to technology transfer issues. So very soon, most of the university in Sri Lanka will have IP policy focus on technology transfer. That we are doing along with WIPO. And Bhutan is just passed their national IP policy this year in 2018. And again, they have just amending their IPR laws, and we are working with them to see how best we can enroll or get all the best practices into it. Next year again, they'll be opening it for the stakeholders to share their comments on it. And also with Bhutan, since we don't have a US embassy there in Bhutan per se, so we have USPTO and Bhutan IP office, we are signing a MOU, which is again due by early next year. They are again looking to accede to Madrid Protocol. We have already done a number of training with them, and Most probably, most likely, all of them are acceding to Madrid Protocol very soon. Maldives, we don't have, I state Maldives because that's an interesting country. So far, they don't have any IP legislation as such, but they do have a copyright draft pending with the legislation and GI Act. But because of the government disturbance, they couldn't the things didn't move much. But with the new government, we are very positive, and we feel that we can collaborate and make things work out there. Afghanistan has signed, is a signatory to WTO, so right now we are helping them to amend their IPR legislation and also work with the custom official there to see that they have a recordation system in place. So that's pretty much on the countries. How we are involved there, with US Embassy, we have an ongoing dialogue with, out of these 7 countries, we have an ongoing dialogue with 6 of them. And the dialogue that is there, which we call is TIFA, which is Trade Investment Framework Agreement. Under that dialogue, we meet every quarter to discuss where we are, where things are on IP, as well as obviously on the other trade issues. So that's the way we have been collaborating with these countries. And also we do ongoing non-stop technical collaboration with each and every stakeholder in these countries. Issues, of course, because all these 7 countries, they have a porous border, they share border with many countries. So illegal market, parallel market is flourishing, and it seems it will go move further unless we start pushing or putting a lot of comments and discussion with the government locally. Lack of awareness, of course, is one of the major issue that we face in these countries, because even the government is not much aware on the IPR issues. In few countries like Nepal and Bangladesh, language is also a problem because the official language is Nepalese and Bengali. So all their legislation, draft legislation is put on these language on the website. So again, through our IP dialogue, we are trying to push this, that they should have all this legislation in English version so that it's easier for stakeholder to comment on that. And fourth important issue that is happening in this region is bad faith filing. So that again, we are trying to work with government with changing legislation to see how that can be taken care of. Lack of infrastructure and human resource is definitely one of the issue. And in few countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan, satellite piracy is something which is coming up, and we still have to see and work with the industry to see how and where things are there. Going forward, if you are interested, as I said, if you are interested in India, or if you plan to invest in India, you must look into these neighboring countries. Even if you want or you don't want your product to go or come out of it, it is going everywhere. Get on board with us, support us, as all of us has been saying, that before you get the issue, please come and contact us. And as I said, these country legislation are being amended. So we are in the right position to make things work. This is a time when we can talk to the government as in what changes we need to make them as a global hub for manufacturing or for investment. Be active on commenting on all the legislation, even if you don't plan to be there in near future. As I said, most probably and most likely all the draft legislation will be on website by early next year. We will be notifying the industry association on that, but you also need to be a little more active on these areas. Because it is very easy to say that border becomes a barrier to us, but this is a time where we can make border be trade boosters. So let's be together. And out of 7 of these countries, there are a couple of countries which is really beautiful. So even it's good for you to put in little resource and time into these countries. So that's pretty much I would have.
Thank you so much for that overview and the tremendous amount of work that you are dedicating to those very complex issues. Speaking of porous borders and the close integration of the region, I'd like to turn to Kamal to speak about the ongoing work in India.
Sure. I always say Shruki's got the nicer countries, and I've got the teenager in the room. So it's been a mixed bag of years. Let me concentrate on the good news first. I think that's a nice welcome change for an India portfolio. Copyright, India ratified the WIPO Internet treaties. At the moment, Government of India's statement is that they're not changing the laws, that their laws are in compliance with TRIPS. But I think there is space to, if we think that the TPMs are not enough, to have that conversation. I don't think that door is firmly closed, though that might be the official line. 31D, which is the online streaming mandatory license for copyright, I know that's been an issue that's been on top of our list on copyright. The litigation is continuing. So earlier the stand was that till the Copyright Board is fully constituted, we have a chairman for the IPAB Copyright Board, but we don't have the technical members, so technically there's no forum. But the Delhi High Court just this week held that despite a forum, this is just challenging, the jurisdiction of the board, so the board has to hear this matter. So that's going to go forward. It's slated for 1st of Feb for those who are interested. We've had administrative site blocking done this entire year. We've had 3 IP crime units come up. I think last time when I spoke, we were at 1.5. Now we're at 3. And the Maharashtra crime unit has got a lot of industry support. It's a good PPP collaboration that has worked, and we're hoping to strengthen it. In fact, I'm headed back for a CPAM, and CPAM is a DIPP, the official IP management cell that is doing this, to work with them on policy enforcement and industry coming together on anti-piracy. So that's the good news. It kind of ends there. No, well, that's not true. Even on the pharma side, and I have to thank pharma especially for this, is that I think last year our message was, please speak in one voice, and if you can, please get cross-industry support or cross-association support. So thank you so much for taking that on board. Form 27, which is the working requirement, formally opened after I don't know how many years, and that is going to be streamlined. We've had stakeholder engagement on it, which was very positive, and it was your joint representation with 5 other associations that you had presented, which was actually tabled first, and that drove the conversation. So I would encourage you to continue to do that, and I believe on the patent linkage, though we don't call that in India, notification or early dispute resolution for patent, that's a very long, for patent disputes. That also, I think you've given joint comments, and hopefully that stakeholder engagement will happen soon. So there is a willingness, I think, now to listen. Yes, are we going to solve 3D in the next year? I mean, I wish we can, but that's that's amending the law. But where administrative issues can be taken up, again, joint industry representation. Cross-sector is another one that we can look for, because we saw that in Form 27, and I was pleasantly surprised by this, is that every single industry backed what you had put forward. So I think that's another area that we can work towards. And then that's pretty much where the good news ends, honestly. So on the flip side of things, we're seeing a lot of regulatory hurdles, price controls still in place. We all know the medical device issue that is up front and center in the trade dialogue. We now have seen patented drugs also come under price control using that same provision. And so it's no longer contained to medical devices, but is being broadened, and I think that advocacy needs to pick up. Two other things that happened were, under the customs regulation, India amended their customs IP regulation, took out patents from it. And at the same time, and this is what I think Shopi pointed out, is that our borders are porous, and Bangladesh has increased their pharma manufacturing capabilities without having to really look into major guidelines on safety. So we've seen a lot of influx of product across the border coming in, and because there's no real check on patents, there isn't any anymore. That is a space where we need to work heavily on. On the agriculture side, as most of you may have read, the Delhi High Court struck down Monsanto's patent, and it's in the Supreme Court. Hearings have finalized. We're waiting for the final decision. We don't know which way it'll go. I am not going to answer when this is going to come out, and I'm not going to answer how this is going to go. Anything I say sometimes gets jinxed, so I better just wait for the actual judgment to come out. Last year we had 3K, which is the Software Patents Computer-Related Invention Guidelines, sort of come back on track, and examinations have started, the reports have started coming out. This is something I think we'd like to hear more a bit from industry. We've got mixed results as to how this is going. We're hearing that different offices are treating these applications differently. There may not be consistency. So if we can get that information from industry, that would be really good, and we can bring that up with the IP office. Overall, there are elections next year. So while there are a lot of things that are going well, I don't know how the government is going to look at IP, and especially in sectors like agriculture, pharma, even software for that matter, where India has a very strong domestic industry, or our populist movement. So, so stay tuned for that. Mid-year could get a little different. I do want to thank GIPC and the Chamber for the IP dialogue. This year, the India-US dialogue has gone through some ups and downs, and we haven't been meeting as consistently as we have in the past few years. So the IP dialogue that happened, the IP 1.5 as we are calling it, was really helpful. Bringing PTO, DIPP, and industry together, I think that was crucial. I hope that can continue. So thank you for inviting us for that. I want to thank Kittercy and Dom flying out to India to support us on that as well. And I'm looking forward to working with the Chamber on the work stream. So any help that we can give in that, please do let us know. Thank you.
Great, Kamal, thank you so much for that overview, the bright spots on the horizon, but then also the ongoing challenges and the recommendations for the business community to continue to partner and collaborate. Moving to Kittercy.
Thank you very much for having me here. This is my second year sitting at in this room with everyone. I've been in Bangkok for about over a year, and I cover 10 countries in the Association of the ASEAN nations. Southeast Asian nations. So we have Singapore, which is the top-ranking innovation country, and we have Myanmar that doesn't have IP law as of today. They have old laws, but they are developing their IP laws right now. So there's a variety of issues that differ in different countries. So I'm going to start with the ASEAN level. There are some good news and some, not so good news at the ASEAN level. The good news is that, as you may know, that ASEAN has this ASEAN Working Group on IP Cooperation. This is composed of 10 IP offices, getting together about 3 or 4 times a year to talk about how to improve the IP cooperation within the region. So they have the action plan, 2016 to 2025 action plan that includes a lot of things that we would like to see. So we're supporting this action plan. We support the ASEAN-wide activities that would meet some of the goals that they indicate in the action plan. If you go to ASEAN region, you will see that there are a lot of activities, IP activities, because ASEAN is a market for Japan, Australia, Europe, also Korea, as well as other countries, in China. Oh, I almost forgot China. China is all over ASEAN region. So there are a lot of offices, from these countries, IP offices from this country to send their IP attaché to be based in either Singapore or Bangkok. And they do a lot of activities as well. We cooperate with them on some of the activities that we have shared interest. For example, enforcement. We do things together, so we leverage our resources. But there are some issues that we don't have the eye-to-eyes agreement on. For example, the geographical indications issues. So we would conduct our training program separately for ASEAN region. There are a lot of forces, on IP. For example, there's CPTPP that has been signed, and 4 countries in ASEAN have signed the agreement. 2 have ratified them. Singapore and Vietnam have ratified CPTPP. We are waiting for Brunei and Malaysia to ratify the agreement. So once the agreement, which is going to be in effect at the end of this year, once in effect, some of the requirements under the IP chapter will be in effect. For example, the membership to some WCT, WTPP, TTP, and also UPOF 1991 Act would be in effect. So that's good news for us, because these are the treaties that we have put into our TPP, the original TPP agreement. So there, I have mentioned the enforcement activities. We have tons of money, not us, but the IP Attachés have from other offices as well. The EU, for example, have tons of money to do enforcement training program. One of the things that they are looking into doing also is to try to develop or study regional trademark system. This is something that the AWGIPC is interested in and want to look into developing some sort of regional trademark system. As far as patent system is concerned, they have this so-called ASPECT, which is ASEAN Patent Examination Cooperation, that acts similarly to PPH. So if a patent is granted in one country, you can ask for accelerated examination in another country. So most of the application that has been granted from Singapore, normally Singapore will finish the examination first. That patent can be brought into, say, Thailand, and Thailand will issue a patent within up to 6 months to a year period. So instead of, Thailand has a backlog and a pendency of up to 15 years, used to be 19 years last year, now they have improved to 15 years. So instead of that, you have to wait 15 years, you can get the patent within 1 year after Singapore has granted the patent. So that's some good news. Well, we don't have real bad news on the ASEAN level. We just have some disappointing news in that they have formed this ASEAN network of enforcement expert, the ANI group, and the group has met a few times, and we have not seen a lot of progress, as far as the regional harmonized, exchange of information or enforcement. So we're going to try to watch for what's going to happen with this group. As far as going down to the country by country, I'm just going to focus on a few countries and only a few issues. And I'm going to start with Thailand first, because Thailand was moved from priority watch list to watch list at the end of last year, and they have been very active in trying to meet the work plan that USTR have agreed upon with the government of Thailand. So there are a lot of enforcement activities and a lot of law development. A lot of laws are pending. They're not going to move very quickly from now till probably after the election in February next year. So we are waiting to see if when the government is has changed, what's going to happen to the IP environment in Thailand. I have to mention Indonesia because there are a lot of crazy things going on in Indonesia, but we also have been successful with the patent law amendment that require manufacturing in the country. We have been able to have them issue a temporary fix by the patentee can extend the manufacturing in the country until the patent expires. But it has to be approved by the Minister of Trade. So we want them to go back and change the law so that we have the permanent fix. So I'm going to end there because my time is up. So go ahead.
Thank you so much for that, Kitastri. Now, rounding out the dialogue, Pete, over to you to hear the Middle East and North Africa update.
Thanks, Kate. So I've been out in post about a year now, and thankfully it's been a pretty quiet year in the Middle East, so that's been nice. No, I mean, it's been a pretty dynamic year, as many of you know, and the Middle East, both economy and IP is quite, I use the word dynamic again, but everything moves quickly. Issues that are popping up as the Middle East changes from an oil-dependent region to an innovative, creative economy is just changing every single day. Every country wants to be that new hub of the Middle East, either it's Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan. Every country is trying to compete. Again, who can attract the most innovative companies? Who can create the most domestic manufacturing of products to export? So it's been a fascinating time. Last year, I was up here on stage and asked for sort of a request, which was to, on the 301 process, to have submissions focused on UAE and Saudi Arabia in particular. And I want to say thank you, because your submissions helped us place UAE and Saudi Arabia on the watch list for some long-standing serious concerns on IP protection. So thank you for that. And I'm going to also give you more homework this year. It's been an interesting year because of the 301 listings in Saudi and UAE. We've gotten a lot of traction. We haven't fixed too many of the issues yet, but we've seen actually some progress in access and on constant dialogue on both pharmaceutical issues in UAE and Saudi, but also on the unprecedented piracy that was started in Saudi Arabia under the name Be Out Q, which is now spread throughout the region and into Europe and into the US. So with the 301 process, this helps us gain more traction in our conversations, and to the point where even in, let's say, very difficult conversations happening since October, issues of IP have still been pressed by our embassies in the region. So I think it's a testament to them, but it's the support from industry through the 301 process. So in addition to, I think, more focus again this year on Saudi Arabia and UAE on 301, the new request is also to focus on Egypt. We've had over the past 7 months some very productive dialogue with the Egyptian government, and they are looking at the 301 listing as a motivation to overcome some challenges. So I would ask that in this year's submission process, a more focused submission on Egypt would be very helpful for our interactions there. On some positive news, just a little bit, the Saudi IP Authority, the brand new authority in Saudi Arabia, consolidated their offices and is moving along pretty solidly to open up next year. We've been working with them almost monthly to consult with them. And in that process, we saw the Saudi Arabia government for the first time on IP have a public notice about whether to join the Budapest Treaty. And Saudi Arabia also joined the Marrakesh Treaty about a month ago as well. In Dubai, we have one department that actually enforces counterfeits, which is great. That's the Dubai Department of Economic Development, Dubai DED. Dubai Customs, not as much, but hopefully with some focus we can make that better. And then finally, because I know I'm running out of time a little bit, just a shout out to all of our interagency colleagues. We are about 12 of us around the world, but we rely on both our teams in the US, but also in the embassies that we cover. And given some of the other issues going on, I'm blessed in my region to have some amazing commerce and econ officers. But I did want to give one specific shout out today, and that's to Ambassador Lawrence Silverman, our Kuwait ambassador. He is by far one of the most pro-IP ambassadors I've ever met and is an advocate for all of your issues. In comments and speeches about anything, IP comes up. He routinely calls the Deputy Prime Minister on IP issues, and without his advocacy, Kuwait probably will not be submitting a new copyright legislation in the next few weeks. So I want to give him a shout out, and also to all of our interagency that really help us support our efforts. Thank you.
Great, Pete, thank you so much for that. And knowing that we have a limited amount of time to shape out this conversation, knowing that we covered about 20 countries here, really appreciate your all's perspective. But I want to just close with on that point of specificity with respect to advocacy, as we are all covering a myriad of issues, as you all just gave us a very comprehensive overview at a high level. And a number of suggestions were put forth from all of you of how industry and the business community can continue to collaborate in your ongoing work. We heard visits and in-person advocacy is very important. We also heard joint representations with respect to government solicitations and other policy proposals. We also talked about the importance of regional collaboration. And then in particular, in closing, on the very specific Special 301 process. In closing, would just love to give you all one last final word if you think that there's one additional specific point of advocacy that we should all be thinking about as we continue to partner moving forward. I'll start with Kamal.
Sure, just combine what we've said. We started with the first panel to the last and do all of it. But data, and please talk to us before the problem gets bigger. If you are seeing an issue, let us know first so we can start tracking it and start, at least in our way, monitoring and addressing it. But data, data, data.
Great.
I'll echo what Komal is saying because it's the same reason. But in addition to that, especially in my reason, because not many of you are interested, as in you don't know, aware on how things are shaping up there, I would request that please give some time and resource to these countries. I know most of the industry have their IP office in India, so maybe you can, get it started, ask them to request them to get in touch with us, or get into the region just to see what is the IP landscape right now and how we can help together each other.
For me, if you have any relationships with the domestic companies, SMEs, or any foundation, research centers, if you have that relationship, we really like to tout that so that we can have the local voice that support our, IP messages, as well as, the U.S. voice alone, can go that far, but not, that far. So we will need that information to tout.
I think for me, again, I'm going to stick with 301 a little bit. Be specific. A comment that says it's challenging to enforce IP rights in this country is not helpful. A comment that says when we're having problems with, again, Dubai Customs because they don't contact us, that's something that we can take forward. So very specific, detailed comments about where the trouble is. That allows us to pinpoint the good actors from the bad actors, lets us focus our work in actually the key challenges that you face in each process.
Yes. So on 301 report, 2 years back, we had taken off Pakistan off the priority watch list to watch list. So we would request industry to please share their comments on the 301 report for 2019, because that way we'll get to know whether our action plan with Pakistan has been working over the period or not. So that will help us to make, take a decision on 301 stuff. Thank you.
Well, excellent feedback from all of you, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and perspective, and we look forward to continuing the strong partnership moving forward.
All right, thank you so much to Kate and our IP attachés and specialists. So one last housekeeping note before I turn it over to Dom and Ellen. One of my additional hats at GIPC is cruise director. So if I could just ask that the attachés, IP specialists, and the GIPC team stick around right after the event, we're going to get a quick picture. And with that, I'd love to welcome Dom and Ellen to the stage.
All right, I'd like to thank GIPC for inviting us here again for the 12th annual IP Attaché Roundtable that's hosted by GIPC. This has been a tremendous event today, but it's been a very valuable opportunity to us each year. It allows us to come back and to meet with you all and to discuss these important intellectual property developments throughout the world and to update ourselves in addition to having a conversation with you on your priorities, and it helps us to shape our work in moving forward over the next year. So today we heard 4 panels. We started off with the multilateral panel that talked about IP developments in Geneva at the World Intellectual Property Organization and the World Trade Organization, but we also talked about IP issues in Europe at the European Union and how those issues are discussed and what is discussed there. And then we dove into more detail, looking more specifically at Latin America, China, and then Asia and the Middle East. So these issues follow a certain pattern, and I'd like to highlight some observations from today. In particular, I think when we talk about what's discussed at the multilateral level, these policy debates that take place there are reflected in the discussions and the debates at the national level. So it brings to mind the importance of addressing all these issues in tandem. And most fundamentally, when we talk about policy issues in Geneva or in Brussels, we're talking about oftentimes the relationship between intellectual property and innovation. We're firm believers here, but not all the rest of the world is a firm believer in that. And as we look at the ripples of that debate and as how they affect the national level, and we transition to thinking about what was discussed in the different panels today, we can think about Brazil's insufficient allocation of resources to address its 15-year patent backlog. That's a very important issue. We can think about the issue created by new legislation that's proposed in Brazil that would create a stronger relationship between the Ministry of Health and ANVISA, the health regulatory authority, the health regulatory authority in the Ministry of Health, and the Patent Office, where the Ministry of Health would have a say in the granting of pharmaceutical patents and the implications of that. We can talk about the reorganization of intellectual property offices and also the restructuring of governments and the resources that come out of that are being applied to the IP system. When we talk about China, we've heard that there's a greater recognition of the value of intellectual property, and this is driving some legislative reform. It's also driving more pernicious behavior, such as subsidies for patent and trademark applications that are creating a prolific number of filings and some U.S. companies who are being potentially hurt by all these sometimes frivolous applications and patents and trademarks that are being produced. We also heard about the hijacking of the intellectual property system to promote national level policies and local policies and how this can be a problem for us. So it's important for us to think of these in the broader context of Geneva. But then when we went on to the Asia and Middle East panel, we heard about how the relationship between intellectual property and innovation translates into the removal of patents from the customs regulations in India. We heard about the local working requirement in India. We heard about the invalidation of patents in the courts. All of these issues are very important. Also, the implementation of TPP. This is affected by these broader policy debates. So what should we take home from the discussions today? And I'm just going to leave you with a few of my thoughts and observations. I think one is that we need a holistic approach when we address intellectual property issues in any country. We need to be able to address these issues from the highest policy level down to the technical level, and that is something that is the bread and butter of the attachés in their work. They all work on policy issues, but they're also intellectual property attorneys with many years of experience. They're able to drill down into these technical details. Another is the importance of coordination, and when I say coordination, I'm talking about several levels here. One is coordination between intellectual property attachés and other intellectual property attachés. For example, Duncan talking with Debbie about policy issues that have effects in Geneva and also affect China. We're talking about also coordination between the attachés and their teams back in headquarters. We're talking about coordination between the attachés and their teams with other agencies like the intellectual property enforcement coordinators. And I must note here that there has been a lot of positive coordination in that regard, and the IPLEX have been very positive, very valuable partners to us, but we always think that more can be done in this regard. And most importantly, when we talk about coordination, there's a strong value to coordination between GIPC and other U.S. stakeholders and the attachés. We've heard today about how valuable it is for the attachés to be contacted directly by you. We've had a number of people here in the audience who've gone out to meet with attachés in country and work with them, and that's been very valuable to us. We've heard about the importance of data to support our work. So if you have data that you can provide or information about problems that your companies are experiencing or your associations, we want to hear about it because it can help us to further our work. And the final point that I'll leave you with is an issue related to resources and structuring of the program and a legislative support for the program. That's something that came up in our first panel discussion about intellectual property attaché diplomatic rank. It's a long-standing issue. It determines how much access the attachés get to host government officials, sometimes senior officials. And the attachés' primary work, as you've heard today, is in advocacy. And if they don't have access to senior government officials, that impairs the type of work that they can do. So we would value GIPC's support for this initiative and any legislative means of carrying this forward. With that, I thank you once again for being here.
So Dom did a great job, I think, of summarizing the panels. So what I would say just to that is we listened carefully, we received your message, and I think we have some exciting projects that we can work on with you next year. So it's my honor to close our program today. First, I'd like to thank the attachés. Your wholehearted support for innovation and creativity around the world is sorely needed, and particularly abroad. So thank you so much for picking public service as your career and for all the work that you do for us. Second, I'd like to thank the GIPC team, Kelly Anderson, Pink Strasser, Patrick Kilbride, and the rest of them for doing such a great job on our event today. It's our most popular event every year, and we're always very excited for it. And last but not least, if you, like me, still have not finished your holiday shopping, I don't want to do a little PSA. We actually have a holiday shopping guide. We want to keep your families and your friends safe from counterfeit, unsafe products, so check it out. The bottom line is trust your instincts. If it looks too good, it probably is. And have a wonderful, happy holiday to you and all your family. Thank you.